So I was 6 years old when I went missing for a couple of days. This happened during summer at my grandmother's farm, somewhere about an hour or so from the city. I can barely remember what actually happened, but the adults told me later what I said and did, which is honestly the creepiest part, I think. Back then, I slept in a big room with 4 other kids, my brother and 3 cousins. My grandmother, uncle, and aunt slept in the house too, and everything was normally pretty chaotic there, but nothing like what happened that day. So, it was Sunday morning. My grandmother and uncle got up early to feed the animals and get ready for church. Around 7 a.m. when they came to wake up all the kids, I just wasn't in my bed. My shoes were gone, and the shirt and the shorts that I wore were missing too. The adults called the police and my parents after looking for a bit, who lived about 700 miles away. They searched with the dogs, neighbors joined in, but there was nothing. No tracks and no signs at all. 2 days later, though, some hunters found me in a forest roughly 12 miles away. They took me to the nearest police station, and eventually I was brought back to my grandmother's house. But here's the weird part. So, apparently I wasn't dirty, hungry, or even scared. I had a book in my hand. The clothes that I wore were several sizes too small and had been cut off, and the shoes that I had on weren't mine. The ones that I owned were still at home, apparently, and there was no explanation given for any of this. Years later, my nephew, now a police officer, managed to get the old files as well, and apparently I told the police something really disturbing. Apparently I had said that I had come from a school, but I was too young to actually attend school at the time, which was weird, and I claimed that they had taught me who I am and how to be me. I described sleeping in a room with many kids, all of us being taught rules and shown images of families that we would supposedly join soon. The book that I had was full of pictures of people that I knew as well, neighbors, family friends, relatives, and other kids from my daycare. I said that I knew all their names, but none of the personal details. The police questioned me multiple times, at the station and at home, recording around several hours total, and they didn't know how to handle it, and honestly, neither did my family. The strangest part, though, came when I returned to my grandmother's house. So, it's a bit of a weird story, but long story short, my mother didn't believe that I was actually her son. She insisted my birthmark on my left ear was gone, a mark that had been there since I was born. She tried to prove it to the police and demanded that they keep looking. Even the dogs at the farm didn't recognize me too. They had to be caged for a while because they reacted really aggressively toward me. My mother eventually took me home after 3 weeks, but she was cold and distant. She never really treated me as her child in the same way again, even all these years later, in fact. But then, 2 years later, my youngest brother was born, with the exact same birthmark that apparently I had. My mother pointed it out and would occasionally ask questions like, "Who are you and where is my first son?" It was a lot to deal with growing up. Growing up, I always felt like I didn't belong anywhere. My mother didn't attend any of my achievements, my room at home was empty, and my personal items were pretty much discarded. I eventually joined the military, though, became a pilot, served for 15 years, and now I live a quiet life. I like flying, boating, being alone, and generally avoiding attention. Socially, I only feel alive when drinking now, which is pretty rare, but even now I cannot shake the feeling that I was replaced at some point. That somehow the person that I was meant to be was taken and I was put in his place. I often wonder if whoever I replaced is out there somewhere, doing things that I can't imagine. I've obviously tried to investigate this over the years. My nephew gave me the files, and I've searched records and spoken to other people. The problem, though, is that this all happened during the communist era, when police records weren't transparent and many things were just simply undocumented. There are so many small details that just cannot be explained as well. The clothes not fitting, the shoes that I didn't own, the book with all the faces, the way that my mother reacted. Even after all of this time, it doesn't make much sense to me. And look, I don't share this much because people assume that I'm exaggerating or making it up, and look, I get it. If I heard this story from somebody else, I probably wouldn't believe it too. But after 35 years of searching now, I still cannot explain it. I have no memories of those 2 days, but the pieces that I do have, the book, the clothes, the birthmark, my mother's reaction, none of it adds up logically. The thought that maybe someone or something actively replaced me with me is something that I've had to live with my whole life now. I've also come to accept that I'll probably never know the full truth. I've held on to this for years because I was afraid people would just call me crazy. I'm in my late 20s now, married, finishing my medical training, and have a family as well. So, yeah, it's not exactly the kind of thing that you post casually, I suppose. But I feel like I need to get it off my chest because I've never met anyone who's experienced anything like this before, and it still bothers me every now and then. This happened when I was 17. I had a part-time job doing early shifts at a bakery, and the shift started at 4:30 in the morning, so I'd usually wake up at around 3:45 to get ready, dress, brush my teeth, grab my wallet, keys, the usual. I hadn't had any alcohol, drugs, or anything else that could mess with my perception leading up to that morning too, just for the record. The house that I lived in at the time, it was at the edge of town on a slight rise, with a rough gravel driveway that wrapped around the back so I could avoid backing out into the street. That morning, I went out to my car and realized that some of my mum's friends' vehicles were blocking the driveway, so I decided to loop the car around the front yard to get clear instead. As I drove past the edge of the yard, my headlights caught something near the neighbor's paddock. At first, I thought it was a person because of the humanoid shape, but within a second, my brain rejected that idea. It was something else. Tall, skinny, but muscular, at least 6'5" by my estimate. The skin was pale grey with a slight sheen, almost like porcelain. Long arms that ended in hands that I couldn't fully count the fingers of, legs longer than they should have been, and feet that didn't look right at all. Its head was elongated and smooth, tapering slightly at the top, with huge dark eyes that caught the light from my headlights. I couldn't see a mouth, and the nose was just 2 tiny holes from what I could make out. No ears that I could see. It looked nothing like any human that I'd ever seen before. But the thing, whatever it was, noticed me immediately. It raised its arms slightly, turned, and bolted across the field toward the trees behind the neighbor's paddock at a speed that I have no idea how that is even possible. I don't exaggerate when I say that it moved faster than any human possibly could, sprinting and accelerating at a speed that only a vehicle is possible of doing. I yelled, slammed the gas, but didn't dare chase it into the paddock. My head was spinning the whole way down that street too, heart pounding out of my chest. I got to the stop sign at the end of the road, turned off the engine, and just sat there for a solid 5 minutes trying to convince myself that I was just seeing things. I went to work later that morning, tried to tell a couple of co-workers what I'd seen, or what I thought I'd seen. One laughed, another said that they believed in aliens and started talking about UFO sightings and conspiracy stuff that I didn't know anything about at all. Up until that moment, I didn't even think that aliens were real, or even if I had thought that they might possibly be, it was like a joke in my head. But when I got home that evening, I realized that my bedroom window, one that didn't have a screen and could easily be opened from the outside, was open. No one admitted to opening it too, and it was odd because I know that I hadn't done it the night before because I always locked it. It freaked me out enough though that I haven't slept with the window open since then. Since then, I've read stories online about tall grey humanoid encounters and all sorts of weird things, and while a lot of them seem exaggerated or sort of tied to drugs or something maybe, some match the proportions and the movements eerily close to what I saw that day. It's unsettling too, to say the least, when you read something like that. I don't think that I've ever fully processed what I saw. I've never seen anything like it again, but the memory of just how wrong it felt, how impossible it seemed, I cannot shake that. I've told a few close friends over the years, but never in any detail. Most people just write it off, which I guess I understand. I'm sharing it here though because if anyone else has had an encounter like this, I would love to know that I'm not the only one. Because even if it isn't explainable, like scientifically or whatever, it felt more real than anything I've ever experienced in my life. I've got to get this off my chest because it honestly shook me up, and I'm still not over it. I'm not the kind of person to believe in ghosts, but after this, I don't know what to think anymore. So a few months back, I went on a road trip with a couple of friends to a national park. I'd been looking forward to hiking and exploring all the spots there, especially a particular section, which I'd read a lot of old cabins and history was attached there. Nothing about the historical part had me worried. Again, I wasn't really thinking about ghost stories. I was just excited to be outside and away from the city a bit. We spent the morning driving the Skyline Drive loop, stopping at overlooks, taking pictures, just enjoying the park. Around early afternoon, we decided to check out one of the old cabins along the trail, the Carter Cabin, which basically was a 2-story wooden structure left empty for visitors. You can walk through it, go up a very narrow staircase to the loft and peek over a small railing as well, but you can't really go into the upper floor because the gate is blocked off. When we arrived, there was a small group of hikers who had been exploring it just before us. They were heading back down the trail when we got there, so we were basically alone. The sky was grey, a bit overcast, which gave the whole area a quiet and slightly oppressive feeling. But we started exploring the cabin. The wood, it creaked under our feet. The air smelled damp. The upper loft was colder than the ground floor. Nothing crazy yet. But then, as we stepped outside to the left side of the cabin to look at a small storage shed, we all heard stomping from above. And I don't mean faint creaks. I mean clear, heavy, angry stomps, like someone was running from one side of the second floor to the other. It wasn't random either. It sounded deliberate, like somebody was pacing aggressively. At first, we assumed that someone had snuck back in after the previous hikers, so we went back inside to go and check it out. But there was no one there. The loft was empty. The stairs didn't make any more noise than before. The doors and the windows were still closed. My friend Kate even swore that she felt her chest suddenly tighten, like a weight pressing down on her. Something you don't expect from just thinking that there's a ghost. We all froze for a few seconds though, and then we started hearing it again. The stomping, moving from one side of the loft to the other, sometimes stopping near the blocked gate, so it sounded like it was watching us from above. It wasn't faint too. It was loud enough that it could have been somebody stomping in the woods, but there was literally no one there. You could hear the rhythm perfectly though. Left, right, pause, right again. We stepped outside again and tried to call out, but the moment that we all spoke, the sound stopped. And it wasn't just like it faded, it just sort of stopped all of a sudden. Silence. That's when I noticed something weird. A shadow along the railing of the loft. Not a full person, not clear, but just a silhouette of something moving very slightly. But when we looked directly, it disappeared. None of us could explain it, though. I tried to stay calm and rational. I mean, maybe it was an animal in the loft or something. but there were no gaps in the walls or the roof for a deer or a raccoon, or nothing could have made that pacing rhythm at least. My friends were shaking too, and we all agreed that it felt like we were being watched all of a sudden. Eventually, we left the cabin, but even on the trail back to the parking area, the feeling just didn't go away. Every crack of a branch, every gust of wind against the trees there sounded like footsteps. Every shadow looked like somebody else was following us, and the thing that really got me was how human it felt. Most creepy stuff in nature can be explained away by wind, wildlife, or your imagination. But the pacing, the pauses, the way the presence seemed aware of us, it felt like someone or something was actively monitoring us. Since the trip, I've read a lot about the cabins there. There are multiple reports of unexplained sounds in the old cabins, people feeling a presence, shadows moving along the lofts. Some even report heavy footsteps that sound exactly like human pacing, disappearing when approached. I'm still unsettled thinking about it. I went back online and checked the cabin cams from the park rangers. They have motion sensors for wildlife there, and no human activity was recorded during the hour that we were there. Nothing. Honestly, I don't know what we encountered. I'm not someone who normally thinks ghosts are real, like I said earlier, but something about the timing, the consistency of the sounds, and that shadow, it just doesn't feel like sleep deprivation, imagination, or wildlife, like, at all. Has anyone else ever had something like this happen in cabins or other old historical park buildings? I keep thinking about going back, but I'm also really hesitant. In fact, even sharing this, I feel that same heaviness in my chest. This is going to sound like a weird mix of folklore and personal experience, but it honestly shook me when it happened. I grew up hearing all kinds of local ghost stories, from my grandma mostly, in a small riverside town in southern Mexico. She never told them like scary campfire stories for kids. She talked about them like they were just things that happen sometimes, part of the world that you learn to respect, I guess. Our town had this old, narrow river running along the edge of the neighborhood, and during the day, people would hang out there, do laundry, talk, kids would play near the bank. At night, though, almost nobody went even near it. When I was around 14, I asked my grandma why this was. She just looked at me, paused, and then said, "Because sometimes she walks there." She was talking about La Llorona, but not like the movies or the memes online. According to her, you don't always see anything. Sometimes you just hear her, and that's enough. She told me a story from when she was about 16 as well. She and her cousin had stayed late at the neighbor's house, and on the walk home the streets were dark. The streetlights barely reached the river, and shadows stretched along the banks. And at first, everything was okay. But then they heard crying. Soft and distant, not the kind of crying that a real person makes. Long, hollow sobs that seemed to stretch out across the night. Her cousin froze and whispered, "Do you hear that?" They both listened, heart pounding. The crying seemed to move closer and farther without any pattern, like it was floating in the air, back and forth. And then, faintly, they heard a whisper, almost like a mother calling for children. And that was when they ran. They didn't look back until they got home, and they were shaking. When they told her father, he didn't look surprised. He just asked, did it sound close or far away? When they said far, he nodded. Because, according to him, if the crying is distant, she's somewhere else. But if it's near, that's when people get in real danger. Now, I'd always shrugged this off as a bit of a story. That was, until a few years ago. You see, I was visiting my grandma again, and I was staying at her house late one night. It was maybe around midnight. The river was quiet, just a 10-minute walk away. The air was still. I stepped outside to grab some water from the tap, and then I heard it. crying, very soft, almost swallowed by the night. I froze, my stomach knotting up. It was faint, distant, and I told myself that it was probably somebody near the river, maybe a drunk or a kid messing around. I went back inside and mentioned it to my grandma. She did not laugh, though. She also didn't ask if I was imagining things or anything like that. She just looked at me and asked the exact same question that her father had asked her all those years ago. Did it sound close or far away? I paused. I realized in that moment that the sound wasn't moving closer, but it wasn't just faint background noise either. It had a shape, almost like it was layered over the ambient sounds of the night, distant but deliberate. I told her far, and she nodded quietly, almost like she was relieved. I didn't sleep that night. I kept hearing little things, a branch snapping, a wet rustling sound by the edge of the yard, the soft echo of crying far down the river. Nothing got closer, thankfully. Nothing made contact. But the tension, and the sense that something was aware of me out there, well, that stayed with me for a long time. The next morning, I went down to the river with my grandma. The banks looked normal in the daylight, people washing clothes and kids skipping stones. I took a look around, and I did find some footprints in the mud that looked odd, small and half-formed. They didn't seem to match anything human, I suppose. My grandma just shook her head and said that she'd seen those before, many times, always after hearing the crying at night. I've gone back to that town a few times since then. I've walked along the river at night, even. I've never heard anything close as that night, but every time that I get near it after dark, there's this pressure, a weight in the air, like the night itself is holding its breath almost. I don't know if it's her or something else, but after hearing what my grandma told me and actually experiencing something like it myself, I really don't doubt those old stories anymore. I've been thinking about this for years, and I still cannot explain it. So a friend and I, we were walking in the woods behind my grandma's old place up near Lake Windermere in northern England. It was late, maybe close to like 9:30 in early October, and we decided to take one of the trails that we'd always hiked during the day. I'd walked this trail dozens of times before, but at night, it felt completely different. Heavier somehow, like the air itself was denser. My grandma's dog, a border collie mix named Tess, came with us. Normally she stuck pretty close, but never right on top of you, just sort of patrolling the edges. That night, she kept her usual perimeter, sniffing around, ears alert. By the time that we were heading back, night had fully fallen, and there was just enough light from the moon and a faint glow from the nearby lake to keep the trail visible. We didn't bring a flashlight, thinking that it was pretty unnecessary. But as we were walking, maybe 200 meters from the car, something moved in front of us. At first, I thought it was Tess. I mean, the shape was low and moving on four legs, but it didn't sound like her. No rustling and no sniffing sounds. Whatever it was solid black in the shadows, bulky, maybe the size of a large dog, but taller and broader. It stopped, seemed to point its head towards the ground for a second, then turned and disappeared into the trees. We froze, trying to make sense of it. My friend whispered, "Did you see that?" And I nodded, trying to rationalize it. Probably some big dog, maybe a stray, we told ourselves. We started walking again, slower this time, and then Tess appeared on the trail, maybe 15 feet ahead, the same distance that the shadow figure had been. That was when it hit me. This thing wasn't Tess. She'd been behind us the whole time, and nothing should have been moving so silently that close without her noticing. What got me the most, though, was just how precise it moved. I know that sounds a bit weird, but what I mean is that it didn't crash through leaves or underbrush or anything. Every step was really measured and quiet, and it didn't look like an animal that I'd ever seen before. Broad shoulders, low stance, and the shadow made it impossible to see if it had eyes or a face or anything. We both took a few steps forward, though, and then Tess barked sharply at something behind us. I spun around, but the trail was empty. My friend grabbed my arm and said, "We're getting out of here," and that was all it took. We booked it back to the car, and I've never sprinted like that before, not even during track season. After we got to the car and Tess jumped in, we tried to think about what it might have been. Could it have been a deer? No. Deer don't walk like that, and they don't move silently with that kind of posture. Could it have been a bear? Unlikely. I mean, we haven't seen one in this area. My friend and I both agreed that we'd seen something humanoid but not human, and something that could move in total silence like that, and fit between trees like it belonged there, but nothing like we'd ever seen before. I've been back to that trail during the day many times since then, and it's always quiet. Nothing else ever happened, and nothing else ever appeared. And Tess never reacted the same way either. She's fine on daytime walks. But that night, I swear that the forest itself had shifted around whatever that thing was, and I won't be going back there at night. I'll try to explain this the best that I can. So I grew up in a small coastal town in Western Wales. I was born in the early 1990s and lived with my mum most of my childhood. My grandmother lived a few minutes away from me and looked after me as well a lot while my mother worked. Our home life was pretty normal as well. Nothing abusive, nothing chaotic, just a regular family in a pretty quiet place. But there were a handful of things that happened when I was younger that I've never really been able to explain. They weren't constant by any means. It was more like random incidents spread across years, I suppose. I've asked my mum about some of them as an adult, and she either doesn't remember them or says that they never happened. I'll just list the ones that stuck with me the most, though. The first one goes back to when I was around 6 or 7 years old. I hated going to bed, not in the normal kid way that you just want to stay up watching TV sort of thing too. The house felt different after dark there, and during the day it was completely normal, but at night, something about it made me uneasy. I used to keep the curtains shut because the windows faced the back garden, and there were trees behind the fence that really spooked me at the time. Around that time too, I started having a dream over and over again. In the dream, there was an owl sitting outside of my bedroom window looking in. The weird thing was that, in the dream, I somehow knew it wasn't just an owl. It looked like one, of course, but something about it felt wrong. It just stared through the glass like it was watching me too. One night I woke up and saw a shape on the windowsill, though. I remember sitting up and staring at it for a second before realizing that it actually looked like the same owl from the dream. I panicked and shouted for my mother. She came into the room and opened the curtains, and I remember the bird still being there for a moment before flying off when the curtain moved. I brought this up to my mum years later, and she insists that she doesn't remember that happening at all. According to her, she never called into my room about an owl, but the memory, it's so very clear to me. The next thing is a memory that's even harder to place in time. I must have been extremely young, maybe 3 years old. I've always wondered if it was just a dream, but it doesn't feel like one when I think back on it. What I remember is my mum carrying me somewhere at night. 2 other adults were walking behind us. I think one of them might have been my godfather, but I'm not completely certain. We walked into an area where trees were growing close together. They were overhead, so it almost formed a sort of natural dome. Inside that place, there were a bunch of people sitting on the ground in a circle. There was a woman standing at one side of the group wearing a long dark robe. Other people had robes as well. Someone had a big map or a chart laid out on the ground, and they were talking about stars or constellations or something. Obviously, at that age, I wouldn't have understood what they were discussing, but I do remember the conversation sounding serious and technical, like adults planning something. When I asked my mum about it later in life, she said that she had no idea what I was talking about. She's pretty firm that nothing like that ever happened as well. A couple of people suggested that maybe I was remembering a visit to some kind of greenhouse or botanical place, but the location in my memory was just trees and dirt ground, nothing built. Another strange thing that happened was when I was around 10. I had one of those old box TVs in my room sitting on a cheap folding table. On top of the TV, I kept 3 little plastic toy animals. They'd been sitting there for weeks at this point. One afternoon I walked into my room though, flicked the light switch, and all 3 toys suddenly shot off the top of the TV toward me. Not just falling off the edge either, they actually came forward across the room like somebody smacked them. One of them hit the floor near my feet, and the other 2 landed a bit further away. Mind you, there was nothing near the TV that could have knocked them like that. The table wasn't shaken, and there was nobody else in the room. I just sort of stood there trying to figure out what could have caused it. Eventually I put them back on the TV, and nothing like that ever happened again. When I was about 15 though, there was one other moment that really confused me. So I was sitting in the living room playing games on my Xbox. The sofa was near the doorway that led into the hall, and I thought that I heard someone come in through the front door, which was unusual because my mum worked different shifts. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone standing beside the sofa. I assumed it was my mother, so I said something like, "All right," without turning my head. But there was no answer. When I finally looked properly, though, there was no one there. The hallway was empty and the front door was still closed. I even checked the kitchen, thinking that maybe she walked past quickly, but the house was empty. My mum didn't get home until about an hour later as well. The last thing that happened, though, was when I was around 17. By then, I had a computer in my bedroom and spent a lot of time online. And one morning I was lying on my bed using the computer with my back toward the door. My mum was asleep in her room and there was nobody else in the house, but suddenly I felt somebody press a finger into my back 3 times in a row. It wasn't light either, it was firm, like someone trying to get my attention. I spun around immediately, expecting to see my mum standing there, but the room was empty. The door was open and I could see the hallway, but there was no one there. I ended up waking up my mum because it freaked me out so much. She checked the house thinking that maybe somebody had broken in or something, but all the doors were locked. None of these things happened close together, though. They were years apart and in different rooms and just sort of a bit random. And that's the part of why I've just never been able to come up with a single explanation for any of these things. Maybe the owl was just a bird that landed on the window and my kid brain turned it into something bigger. Maybe the toys falling was some weird balance issue on the top of the TV or something. Maybe I imagined the person beside the sofa because I expected my mother to be home or something. All I can say, though, is that I still cannot rationalize the poking on my back that day. I mean, I was wide awake and it felt exactly like a person was standing there and touching me. And look, most of the time there's a normal explanation for stuff like this, right? But when I think back over these moments from my childhood, I still don't really know what to make of them. Nothing like that has happened to me as an adult, which honestly makes the whole thing even stranger, I suppose. It's like whatever weirdness there was just stopped once I got older. This happened when I was 29. I just moved for a clinical placement as a part of my psychology training. First time living completely on my own, new city, didn't know anyone nearby except a couple of co-workers. I had grown up pretty sheltered too, if I'm being honest. Nothing bad had ever really happened to me before, so my baseline for danger was pretty low, I would say. The unit that I rented was on the ground floor of an older complex. Cheap place, not very secure, but I didn't think too much of it at the time. Sliding glass door to a small patio, basic latch, and a bedroom window that honestly looked like you could force it open if you tried hard enough. But anyway, a few weeks in, my dad came to visit. He didn't like the place at all, said the locks were weak, didn't like how exposed the patio was, kept pointing out things that I hadn't even noticed at that point. I brushed it off though, told him that he was just being paranoid. The day after he left, I came home from work and noticed that he'd done something without asking me as well. He'd wedged these thick timber boards across the inside of the sliding door and the bedroom window frame, not nailed in permanently, but tight enough that you couldn't just move them quickly. I remember sort of being annoyed by that. It felt over the top, like he didn't trust me to handle living alone still. I actually thought about taking them out at night, but I was tired and I just didn't bother in the end. That ended up mattering more than I expected to. A few nights later, around 3:30 or maybe 4 in the morning, I woke up to a loud, repeated banging. At first, I didn't fully process it. I thought that maybe someone was slamming a door somewhere in the building. Then it kept going, harder and more focused. I turned toward the bedroom window and that's when it all clicked. Someone was outside, trying to force it open. I could see movement through the gap in the curtain too. 2 people, both pulling and hitting the frame like they knew that it would give eventually. The window, it had a weak latch on it. I already knew that. And if those boards had not have been there, they probably would have been inside within seconds at most. One of them actually managed to get the window open a bit too. Not fully open, but enough to push something through. I saw a leg come into the gap as they tried to force their way in further. I didn't react right away too. I think that that's the part that still bothers me the most. I just sort of watched for a second like my brain hadn't caught up yet. Then I snapped out of it and moved. I didn't even think about calling the police. I grabbed my phone and called my partner at the time. He picked up, heard the noises immediately, and told me to stay quiet while he called the emergency services. I ended up crouched in the wardrobe, trying not to make any noise while the banging went on for maybe another 20 or 30 seconds before it suddenly stopped. By the time that the police showed up, whoever it was, they were already gone. They took a report, checked around the building, but they didn't find anyone. They said that it happens more than people think, especially in older complexes with easy access points. They told me to keep everything secured and said that they'd do extra patrols for a little while as well. After that, I couldn't stay there alone anymore though. My dad, he came back for a few days, and my partner stayed over most nights. Eventually things calmed down a bit and I convinced myself that it was a one-off. But about 2 weeks later, I decided to try staying there by myself again. I didn't sleep in the bedroom. I stayed on the porch in the living room because it felt sort of less boxed in, I guess. I kept all the lights off and tried to just get through the night. Sometime in the early morning, though, I woke up suddenly. No noise that I remember, just that feeling that you get when something is off. I looked toward the sliding glass door, and there was someone standing on the patio. The curtains only covered the upper half, so all I could see clearly were their legs and part of their torso, I think. They were just standing there, facing in, not moving, not trying to open the door, just there. I stayed completely still. I didn't even reach for my phone at first. I had no idea if they could see me or how long they'd been watching for, but after maybe 10 or 15 seconds, I slowly shifted off the couch and started backing away toward the hallway. That's when the noise started again. Same as before, violent pulling on the door, trying to force it open. But again, the board held. This time, I called the emergency straight away, and while I was on the phone, I could still hear the door being hit and pulled. Police got there quickly this time, faster than the first time, and they caught the guy trying to get over the fence at the side of the complex. Later on, I was told that he lived in the same building, not directly next to me, but close enough to watch who was coming and going. Based on what they said, it probably wasn't random. He likely knew when I was alone, which explains why it happened again the first night that I stayed there by myself. I pushed to get out of my lease after that and moved into a place with way better security. Different building, higher floor, proper locks, all that stuff. I never did follow through with anything legally. At the time, I just wanted to get out of there and be done with it, really. Looking back now, though, the part that stands out isn't just what happened. It's how close it actually came to going completely differently. I mean, if those boards, if they hadn't have been there, there's no real reason to think that they wouldn't have gotten inside. The window and the door just weren't strong enough on their own. Stupidly, I was annoyed about it at the time. I thought it was overprotective. Turns out, it really was the only thing that stopped two people from getting into my place while I was asleep and completely helpless. This happened when I was 14, and I still think about it because it's one of those situations where you can't fully prove what was going on, but it definitely wasn't normal. At the time, I was living in a suburb, a quiet area, low crime, lots of families. It was normal for kids my age to be out all day and just sort of head home once it got dark. No one really questioned it. One night I'd been out with a couple of friends riding some bikes and hanging around a park. I left later than usual, maybe around 9:30. It wasn't fully dark, but getting there for sure. I was walking home alone, just following the usual streets that I'd taken 100 times before. And about halfway home, I noticed a dark SUV parked on the side of the road. Once I passed it, it pulled out slowly and started driving behind me too. I didn't panic straight away. I mean, cars move around, people go places, but then I turned left onto a smaller street and it followed me down there. And that was when I started paying real attention. I slowed down a bit to see if it would pass me, but it didn't. It stayed behind me at a distance. So I decided to test it. I crossed the road and then turned right at the next corner, which wasn't the most direct way to my house. The car slowed, paused for a second, then turned the same way. That's when I knew that something was definitely off. My heart rate went up pretty quickly. I tried to act normal and kept walking, but I was watching reflections in the windows and cars to keep track of it. It stayed behind me, not close enough to seem obvious, but not far enough to ignore either. I made another turn, this time into a street that basically looped back toward where I had just come from. There was no reason for the driver to follow unless they were deliberately tracking me as well, and they followed again. At that point, I stopped walking and stepped onto the footpath near a driveway, like I was about to check my phone. The SUV rolled forward and then stopped right next to me. The windows, they were tinted, but not completely. I glanced over for a second, just enough to get a look inside. There were two people in the front. Both had something covering their faces. Not like full balaclavas, but more like scarves or something pulled up high, I would say. That, though, was enough for me. I didn't wait to see what they would do. I just turned and I ran. Not even toward my house, but just away from them. I cut through a side street, jumped a low fence into somebody's yard, then cut through the next street over. I remember my legs feeling like they weren't keeping up with what my brain was telling them to do. I hid behind a parked car for a bit, trying to listen. I couldn't hear the engine anymore, but I didn't trust that they'd actually left. After a minute or two, I kept moving, staying off the main road and cutting through the back paths and alleys until I got close to my place. I didn't go straight home either. I circled the block once just to make sure that nothing was following me, and when I finally got inside, I didn't tell my parents in the end. I don't really know why I didn't too. I think a part of me thought that I'd get in trouble for being late, or a part of me was still trying to convince myself that I'd overreacted or something. It wasn't until a few weeks later that it really hit me just how bad it could have been. I started replaying it in my head, how they matched every turn, how they didn't pass me, how they stopped right next to me instead of just driving on. And then, About a year later, there was a news story about a house a few suburbs over being raided. From what I remember, it was linked to people targeting teenagers, trying to pick them up off the street or something. I don't know if it was actually connected to what happened to me, and I'm not going to claim that it actually was, but the timing and the location really stuck with me. Looking back now, the biggest thing is how calculated it all felt. They didn't rush, they didn't yell anything, they just followed, waited, and then got close enough. If I hadn't have changed my route or tested them, I probably would have just kept walking like normal. And if I hadn't have run when I did, I don't really know what would have happened to me. Again, I don't know exactly what their intentions were, but I'm pretty sure that it wasn't harmless. If anyone else has gone through something like this, then you'll know how something like this really feels and how it just sticks with you for, well, years now. I'm 26, living alone in an apartment. It's a gated complex. Nothing fancy, but secure enough that random people can't just walk in without someone letting them through. This happened late last year, around 8:30 at night. So I ordered food through Uber Eats, just something basic plus a drink. Standard routine. Driver arrives, I buzz them in, they drop it at my door, I open the gate again so that they can leave. I've done it heaps of times, never had any issues. This time everything seemed normal at first as well. I let the driver in, got the notification that it was delivered, opened the gate so that he could leave, and when I grabbed the order, the food was there, but the drink wasn't. I was annoyed, but not completely surprised either. I mean, this also happens all the time. So I just ate and planned to report it afterward. After I finished, I checked the app and saw that I'd missed a few calls and had voicemails from the driver. The first voicemail was weird but not alarming. He just said, hello, are you there, miss, and then it cuts off like he's unsure what he's doing. The second one is mostly silence, and then you hear him quietly say, I don't know how to fix this, like he's talking to himself and not me. But the third one is a completely different tone. He sounds irritated, says something like, alright, I'll just assume that you don't want it then. At that point, I figured that he realized that he forgot the drink and was stressing about it. Didn't think much beyond that. But about an hour later, I'm on the phone to a friend telling them about it, kind of laughing it off really, when there's a sudden knock at my door. Not a normal knock either, full force, like somebody is trying to get your attention immediately sort of knock. I froze. Then it happened again, louder. No pause, just aggressive banging. I didn't open the door and I just sort of stood there for a second trying to process who would even be knocking like that at that time. I asked who it was through the door. There's a pause. Then in a completely different voice, quiet, almost calm, he says, Delivery, I've got your drink. That switch in tone, that's what really got me. It didn't match the way that he was banging at all. I told him through the door that I'd already reported it missing and that he could just leave it outside if he wanted. I didn't want to open the door. He didn't respond straight away, which made it worse. Then I heard him move, like stepping back. I waited maybe 20 seconds, I would say, then checked through the peephole, and he was still there, standing a bit off to the side now. And that's the part that really bothered me too. His car was parked just outside, close enough that I could see into the back seat through the open door. It wasn't just normal delivery stuff. There was like a roll of tape, or what looked like rope as well, coiled up, and something that looked like a knife sitting on the back seat. There were also a couple of objects that I didn't immediately recognize, but they looked like adult toys, I would say. Definitely not something that you'd expect to see in a delivery driver's car. Could all of that have some kind of an explanation? Well, maybe, but seeing it all together at that time with the way that he was acting, it just didn't sit right at all. I backed away from the door and called my friend again, put them on speaker and told them what I was seeing. They told me not to open the door under any circumstances. and after another minute or so, I heard footsteps going away. I opened the gate remotely and watched through the window until I saw him actually leave the complex. I didn't grab the drink right away. I left it sitting outside for a good 10 minutes, just watching to make sure that he didn't actually come back. When I finally picked it up, I threw it straight in the bin too. No chance that I was drinking that. But I did check the cap, and the seal was definitely broken. What I still don't understand is how he got back in though. I mean, I had already let him in. Someone else must have opened the gate, or he followed another car in or something. Either way, he came back in over an hour later, specifically to my door, over a drink that wasn't even really a big deal. I didn't report him at the time. Honestly, I was too scared to. He knew exactly where I lived after all, and had already shown that he could get back into the complex. The idea of him being contacted or getting in trouble and then coming back didn't feel worth the risk. Looking back now, a few things certainly don't add up. I mean, the voicemails, the change in the tone, how hard he was hitting the door, the fact that he waited instead of just leaving the drink, and then what was in the car as well. Maybe the stuff in the car had some unrelated explanation and he was just stressed about his job or whatever, but the whole situation didn't feel normal at any point after those calls. It's been months now and nothing else has happened, thankfully, but I still double-check the gate every night now, and I don't open the door for deliveries anymore too. This happened earlier this year when I just started a casual job at a retail place. It was one of those stores where half the staff are pretty much teenagers, like 15 to 18, and the rest are early 20s. A new guy started maybe a few days after me as well. From the outside, nothing about him should have been an issue. He was polite, always saying hi, always smiling, always trying to be helpful. Managers liked him straight away because he followed instructions exactly and never pushed back. But something about him just didn't sit right with me almost immediately. I couldn't explain properly at the time why that was too, which made it harder because if someone had asked what did he do, I wouldn't have had a clear answer for them. It was more how he acted rather than any one thing, I suppose. He paid a lot of attention to me specifically too. Not in an obvious way at first, just always ending up near wherever I was working. If I moved sections, he'd find a reason to be there. If I went on break, he'd show up not long after and sit at the same table, even if there were empty ones everywhere. I kept interaction short though. Basic responses, no eye contact longer than necessary, just trying to give the signal that I wasn't really interested in chatting. It didn't work though. He'd keep trying to start conversations, usually about random stuff that didn't go anywhere. One thing that I noticed early on though was how he sort of mirrored people too. If someone laughed, he'd laugh louder. If someone high-fived, he'd try to insert himself into it. It didn't feel natural and more like he was copying what he thought normal behavior looked like. He also made a comment one day that really stuck with me too. Something like, "I've got to be careful here, I can't mess this job up." I asked what he meant by that, and he sort of brushed it off and said that he'd had issues before. He said it casually, but it just didn't land that way. Anyway, a couple of shifts later, I started noticing that he spent a lot of time talking to the younger staff. Not just casual chatting too, he'd single them out a lot, standing way too close, asking personal questions, trying to keep conversations going when they clearly wanted out, especially the girls. There was one girl too, maybe 16, who worked in a different section. I saw him corner her near the stockroom one afternoon, not physically blocking her, but positioned in a way where she just couldn't walk off without brushing past him at least. She looked really uncomfortable too. Short answers, looking around, that kind of thing. But he just kept talking. I didn't step in at that time, which I really regret now, but at the time I was still sort of second-guessing myself. Maybe I was reading too much into it. A day or two after that, Something else happened that kind of confirmed things for me, though. I went out to the staff car park on my break to grab something from my bag, and his car was parked a couple of spots over, boot slightly open. I wasn't trying to snoop, but it was in clear view when I walked past it, and inside there was stuff that really didn't make sense for normal work setup. There were handcuffs, a duffel bag with things in it, what looked like a combat knife sitting loose there. There were also pictures of people in there, not hidden and just sitting there, mixed in with everything else. On their own, maybe each thing could be explained, I suppose, but altogether, plus everything else that I'd already noticed, it didn't feel like a coincidence anymore. I didn't touch anything, just kept walking, but it stuck with me for the rest of the shift for sure. Then, 2 shifts later, I came in and all of a sudden he just wasn't there anymore. At first I thought that he'd called in sick or something. Later though, one of the supervisors mentioned that apparently he'd been let go. I asked why, and they didn't want to go into detail, but one of the other staff told me that he'd been reported for making one of the underage girls really uncomfortable, repeatedly, enough that it got escalated straight to management. After that, one of the managers that I got along with pulled me aside and basically said, off the record, that he apparently had a history that they didn't fully pick up on during the hiring process. I'm not going to repeat exactly what was said, but it involved prior complaints about inappropriate behavior with minors. And that was enough to connect everything. Looking back, the pattern was there from the start too. The over-the-top friendliness, the way that he inserted himself into conversations, the focus on younger staff, and the comment about not being able to mess up again. And then what I saw in his car too. I keep thinking about how close he was getting to people before anyone stepped in, and I also keep thinking about how I didn't say anything when I first noticed that something was actually off. Nothing actually happened to me, but I'm pretty sure that the only reason for that is because I kept a distance from the beginning. And honestly, I think the only reason he paid attention to me at all is because I look younger than I am. I get mistaken for being a teenager pretty often, in fact. Since then, I've been a lot more direct when something feels wrong. At the time, I kept telling myself I needed proof before saying anything, but realistically, that just gave him more room to keep doing what he was doing. Anyway, that's it. He was only there for about a week, but it was enough to leave a pretty bad impression for sure. I'm curious, though, if anyone else has worked with someone like this, where nothing obvious happens at first, but everything about them just feels off from day one. I don't really talk about this much anymore because it sounds like something out of a bad movie, but the part that bothers me is that there were multiple people there, so it wasn't just me imagining things. This was when I was around 11, living with my mum, her partner, and my older sister. We had literally just moved in that week. The place was pretty good, an older house that had been redone, new carpet, fresh paint, and that kind of thing. The first weird thing that happened was a couple of nights in. We were all sitting in the lounge watching TV, no one moving around, no pets, nothing like that. Then my sister points at the floor and says something like, "What's that?" There were marks suddenly showing up on the carpet. Not stains, but actual impressions, like somebody was stepping down and lifting their foot. You could see the shape press in, and then release, and then another one appear a bit further ahead. It wasn't random either. It moved in a straight line across the room like somebody was walking from the hallway toward the TV. None of us moved, and I remember everyone kind of freezing and just watching it happen. It wasn't fast or anything, more like a normal walking pace. But when it got near the TV stand, the screen just suddenly cut off. No standby light, nothing, just off. That's when everyone reacted at once. My mum yelled, my sister got up off the couch, and I remember pulling my feet up off the floor without even thinking about it. My mum rang the landlord straight away, and at first he brushed it off, but then he made a comment about the previous tenant. It Didn't give full details, just said something had happened. It was long before we moved in, apparently. Later on, I overheard my mother saying to someone that the guy who lived there before had died in the house or something, and apparently it wasn't natural too. After that as well, stuff kept happening, but it wasn't always as obvious as those first footprints. Lights would be off when we knew that we left them on. Other times they'd turn on in rooms that no one had been in. The TV would randomly cut off or switch channels. We had one of those older setups with a DVD player and a set-top box, and sometimes they'd sort of power off at the same time, which was weird. At first, my parents tried to explain it all away. Wiring issues, faulty switches, but it kept happening in ways that just didn't make any sense. Eventually, they just stopped blaming us for things like leaving lights on because they couldn't be sure anymore. And the part that really made it stick for me personally happened a few weeks later. So, I had a friend over after school one day, older than me by about a year or two. I told him about everything that had been going on, and he didn't believe it at all. Kept joking about it, saying that I was trying to mess with him. I actually got my mum to confirm it in front of him, though, just so that he would stop. She didn't go into detail, but just said, yeah, weird stuff like that has been happening. That shut him up for a bit, but he still wasn't completely convinced. Later that night, we were watching a movie on DVD in the lounge room. We paused it and went down the hallway because I was showing him something in my room or something like that. We weren't gone long though, maybe a minute or two. While we were talking, we hear the TV come back on. Not just on, but really loud too. Way louder than we left it. We both stop and just look at each other. There was nobody else in the house at that point. My mum had gone out and my sister was at a friend's place. We walked back toward the lounge slowly. The movie had unpaused itself and was now playing. Volume cranked up way higher than it had been. And I know that people will say that electronics do glitch, and yeah, I've seen DVDs resume on their own before too, but this wasn't that. The remote was on the table where we left it. Nothing had fallen on it, and the volume change didn't make any sense. My friend didn't even try to explain it. He just kind of froze for a second, then backed up and then turned and ran, full sprint out the front door. It was raining that night, and he didn't even stop to grab his stuff. He just ran down the street. I ended up walking over to his place later because we were supposed to stay up and play games. When I got there, he barely opened the door, just enough to talk through the gap, said something about not being allowed to have people over anymore, and then shut it. He didn't come back to my house after that, not even once. We stayed in that place for maybe another 6 months. Nothing as obvious as the footprints ever happened again, but the smaller stuff never really stopped. Lights, electronics, things being slightly off. And look, if it had just been me seeing or experiencing these things, I would probably have written it off by now, but it just wasn't. And that's the part that's really difficult to ignore. This was a couple of years ago when I was doing some seasonal work. I was on a forest crew doing some fire risk reduction, basically just clearing some scrub, thinning out some trees, running chainsaws all day. Pretty standard contract work, really. Long shifts, rough terrain, everyone tired by the end of it. We were based out of a basic campsite just outside of town near a reserve area. Nothing remote, but far enough that once it got dark, there wasn't much around except for some forest and the occasional car way off in the distance. This was the first night of a stretch where we were working about a week straight as well. Everybody was wrecked. I mean, we'd been cutting all day, hauling debris, feeding the chipper, the usual. We ate dinner, sat around for a bit, and then some people started heading to their tents. I wasn't ready to crash yet personally, so I went for a walk down one of the trails near the campsite. Two of the guys that I worked with, Josh and Liam, they caught up to me as well not long after. We just sort of walked and talked for a bit, nothing serious. I think we were complaining about work a little bit, joking around and just some normal stuff. We ended up at a fork in the track where the trees opened up a bit. There was a small clearing, enough space to actually see more than a few meters in front of you. We hung around for a while, maybe about half an hour I would say, just standing around and talking. At some point I noticed movement off to the side though, not directly in front of me, but more on my peripheral I would say. I didn't react straight away because I thought that it was just one of the guys shifting or maybe an animal or whatever. But then I actually looked, and there was something moving between the trees, maybe 10, 15 meters away. It looked roughly human-shaped, but about average adult height, I would say, but there were no real details to it. No face, no clothes, nothing. Just a pale shape, like a silhouette, but lighter than the background instead of darker. The way that it moved is what really stood out to me, though. It didn't walk, it sort of slid across the ground. No sound, no crunching of leaves, nothing. I didn't say anything at first because I thought that maybe my eyes were adjusting weirdly in the dark or whatever. But then it moved again, crossing a bit closer to the track that we were on. That's when I quietly said Josh's name and he looked up, followed where I was looking, and just went quiet. I asked him if he could see it. He didn't answer straight away, just stared at it for a second, and then said something like, "Yeah, I see it." Liam looked over too at this point, and once all three of us were focused on it, it changed direction slightly. Not fast, just deliberate, like it was aware that we were watching now. It moved across the track in front of us, still no sound, and then went behind a cluster of trees. We waited maybe a second or two to see if it would come out the other side, but it didn't. That's when the mood shifted completely too. Nobody was joking anymore, no one tried to explain it. We just turned around and we walked back faster than we came. About halfway back, that turned into a bit of a run as well, not even planned. We all just sort of picked up the pace at the same time. Back at camp, we didn't make a big scene about it, just told a couple of the others what we thought that we saw. We received mixed reactions. Some believed us, some didn't. Some said that it was probably just light playing tricks or somebody else walking around out there. I tried to rationalize it too. I mean, it could have been a person in light clothing, I suppose. But there was really no reason for anyone else to be out there. And the way that it moved didn't line up with somebody walking. No footstep sounds at all, which you definitely hear out there, even at night. But a few days after that, I was heading back to camp alone just before dark at some point. The same sort of general area, but not the exact same spot. And I got that same feeling that you get when something is off. Not seeing anything yet, but just that sort of awareness that you get. I stopped, looked around, and for a second I thought that I saw the same shape again, further back between the trees. Not as clear as the first time, but more like a partial outline, I would say. It didn't move across the track this time, it just stayed there. I didn't hang around to confirm anything, just kept walking, didn't run but didn't stop either. And after that, I never did see it again. I've gone over it a lot since then too, and I've thought about all the things that it really could have been, but I've just never been able to come up with anything. And I mean, three of us saw the same thing at the same time, reacted to it, and described it in the same way afterward too. I don't know if it was something supernatural in the sense that people usually mean, but maybe it was something environmental or visual that we just don't understand yet. Whatever it was, though, I'm convinced that it wasn't normal, and it wasn't something that I've seen before, or since then, working out there in the forests. This happened when I was around 10 or 11 years old. So my family moved out to a place on the outskirts, a bit more isolated than we were before. Not rural farm isolated, but you couldn't just walk to the shops or anything anymore. A pretty quiet area, older houses. The place itself looked fine, recently cleaned up, nothing obviously wrong with it. The first week was pretty normal too. Then some things started happening, mostly around my mum as well. Lights turning off while she was still in the room, cupboards being open when she swore that she shut them, that sort of thing. At the time, I didn't really think too much of it. I just assumed that she was forgetting or we were messing with each other. What made it different for me, though, was the bathroom mirror in the main bedroom. I did not like going in there alone. Not because of anything that I'd seen at first, but just a feeling that something was off there. Hard to explain. After a couple of weeks, though, I started noticing something in the reflection. Not directly in the room, but only ever in the mirror. At first, it was just movement behind me when there was nothing actually there when I turned around. Then it got clearer. I'd see what looked like two figures standing further back in the room, one taller and one smaller. No clear faces and just outlines. The smaller one was always closer to the taller one, and I didn't tell anyone straight away about this too because I really didn't know what to make of it. Around the same time, I started hearing someone call my name at night. It didn't sound like my parents too, it sounded like a kid almost, but not clearly enough to say exactly who. First couple of times I ignored it. One night though it kept happening. Same voice, same tone, just repeating my name over and over again. I remember being half asleep and trying to ignore it, and then feeling something grab my arm. Not a light touch either. It actually pulled enough that I sat up properly. There was nothing there when I looked, but after that, I started avoiding being alone in certain parts of that house. Another incident that stands out happened on the stairs. So I went upstairs to grab something, and as I turned to come back down, I felt a push from behind. Not enough to send me flying, but certainly enough to lose balance and go down a few steps pretty hard. At the time, I told my parents that I slipped. I didn't mention the push because I didn't think that they would even believe me. Things kept happening like that, though. Doors closing when nobody was there, doors closing when no one was near them, locks turning, stuff being moved slightly out of place. Nothing too dramatic in that sense, but consistent enough that it didn't feel random for sure. My dad, he didn't believe any of it. He thought me and my mum were just sort of winding each other up or reading into things too much. That all changed though when my mum went away for work for a few days one time. While she was gone, the same stuff started happening around him. Lights, doors, things moving. He didn't admit it straight away, but you could tell that something had changed in how he acted in the house. He stopped brushing it off completely, in fact. And in the end, we ended up moving out within a year. Official reason was just location and work, but it definitely played a part, let me tell you. After we left, I tried to look into the place a bit later on, and I never really found anything concrete. No reports, no obvious history tied to it, just a normal house on paper. And the part that still really gets me isn't even from when we lived there. You see, when I was about 18, I had what I thought was a really vivid dream. I was back in the area that we moved to after that house, and there was an older woman talking to me like she knew me. She kept saying stuff like, "No one comes to see us anymore," and asking me to come inside. What made it really weird, though, is that I recognized the street layout. It matched a real place near where we had lived after we moved. I brushed it off as a dream, but it stuck with me more than usual for whatever reason. Anyway, about a year later, I had another one. Different setup, but same general area. And this time I was with a friend, and I remember arguing with them in the dream about whether any of this was actually real. They kept saying none of it existed, that I was mixing things up. But it was towards the end of that dream that I remember seeing the old place, and I remember seeing a dark shape or a sort of shadow being inside of one of the top windows of that place in the dream. Since then, I haven't had anything like that happen again. No more voices, no more stuff moving, nothing like that happened in that house. It's the physical stuff though, especially. The arm grab, the push on the stairs, multiple people noticing things independently. That's always made me think that there was something really weird going on there. I don't really have a conclusion as to what it actually was. I try not to think about it every day, but it's one of those things that just never really fully leaves you because there's just no clear explanation for any of it. If it had just been one or two really minor things, I probably would just dismiss it, but it was consistent over months, involved more than just me, and then just sort of stopped once we left. And that's really the part that doesn't sit right with me. I've always been the one in my family who doesn't buy into stuff like this, so this is really the only time that I've actually stopped and thought, okay, that's weird enough that I don't have a clean explanation for it. Growing up, my dad was convinced something followed us from place to place. Not like full-on horror movie stuff, but just constant little things. My sister backed him up too and said that she would hear footsteps when she was home alone sometimes as well. I never believed any of it personally. We moved houses a couple of times, and all older buildings, some semi-detached, some standalone. I just put it down to old wiring issues, neighbors, or people just forgetting what they did 5 minutes earlier. Pretty standard explanations, really. Even when they did tell stories, it always felt like normal stuff just being exaggerated. My mum didn't really commit either way as well. She'd explain some of it, ignore the rest. But anyway, fast forward to when I was in my early 20s. My dad had moved out with his partner, but kept our old family house for a while to fix it up and sell it. So the place sat empty most of the time, and me or my sister would crash there occasionally if we were back in town. I went back one weekend too to grab the last of my stuff at some point. Old boxes, random junk, things that I never took with me when I first moved out. But as soon as I walked in, I noticed that the power had obviously been out at some point. The oven clock and the microwave were both flashing. That's normal after a blackout, so I didn't think anything of it. But the time that they were flashing was the same on both. Not just roughly the same, I mean exactly the same. I walked through the rest of the house and checked a couple of old clocks. The spare room had one of those cheap digital ones. Same thing, flashing the exact same time. That's when I actually stopped and thought about it. Most of those clocks had battery backups, and usually after a power cut, they don't all reset like that, or at least not at the same time down to the minute, unless everything died at once. Still, I wasn't jumping to anything weird yet. And then I checked the hallway where we had an old pendulum clock. Not digital, just mechanical, and that had stopped too. And it was sitting at the same time as everything else. Now that part really didn't make sense to me, at all. That clock did not rely on power in the same way. I messaged my dad, more as a joke than anything, hey, all your clocks are stuck on the same time, guess your ghost is back at it. He replied almost straight away, though. Just said something like, yeah, that happens sometimes when the power goes out. It's annoying. No concern, no surprise, like it was normal. In any case, I finished packing, and I didn't think too much about it then, and I just left. A few days later, though, I was going through some boxes in my apartment, mostly just sort of sorting what to keep and what to throw out. And one of the things that I pulled out was this old alarm clock that I had as a kid. It hadn't been plugged in for years or even used in years. And the screen was half dead, like the numbers were permanently burned into it. I didn't notice straight away as well, but when I looked properly, the display was stuck showing a time. And that's when I realized that it was the same time as the house that I had seen. The exact same. I actually checked my phone to compare because I thought maybe I was just seeing what I expected to see, but no. It definitely matched what I remember from the house clocks. And the weird part is that when I first picked it up, I remember glancing at it thinking that it was showing the current time, and it wasn't until a few minutes later that I realized that it wasn't updating at all. So, for a brief moment, the broken clock, the stopped clocks in the house, and the actual time lined up close enough that I didn't question it. And I guess that's the only thing that's ever made me really pause. I still don't think that there's something following us in a literal sense. There are probably explanations like power surges, battery failures, coincidence stacked on coincidence. But that was the first time where everything lined up way too neatly at once, and I don't know how that's possible. Since then, though, nothing has happened to me personally. My dad still says that he notices small stuff every now and then, even in his newer place. Lights, electronics, things like that. I still default to normal explanations, but I don't shut it down as quickly as I used to. It's less that this is definitely something, and more I just sort of don't have a solid answer for how that's even possible. I'm fine leaving it there, but I'm certainly more open-minded than I ever have been. So I'm 19 and living with my family in a place that we just moved into recently. We'd only been there for a few weeks before all of this began. I wasn't even there the whole time either, because I'd been away for a couple of weeks dealing with some personal stuff, so when I got back it felt like a new place to me. Before moving in, I bought one of those old porcelain dolls from a second-hand shop. Not because I believed anything about them, I just thought that it looked interesting and I really liked it. It sits on a shelf in my room, and I'm mentioning it because people always jump to that, but I'm not doing anything weird with it. It just sort of sits there. But the first thing that started happening, though, wasn't even while I was awake. It was the dreams. The first night actually sleeping there, I had this long, messy dream about moving house, but the house in the dream wasn't ours. It was way bigger, didn't make sense layout-wise, like rooms connected in ways that they really shouldn't. And it felt wrong, but I didn't question it until I ended up in a bathroom that didn't match anything that I'd ever seen. That's when it got more clear, and I remember thinking that this just isn't really right. The next thing that I remember is being in what was supposed to be our current house, except it looked abandoned, like everything was dirty and left there for years. In the kitchen, there was a dead animal on the floor too. I won't go into detail, but it was enough to make me panic and leave, and then I woke up. After that, the dreams got more specific too. A few nights later, I had one where I was in my actual room. Everything matched exactly. I was lying in bed and I couldn't move. There was something standing near the doorway as well. No detail, just a shape. And at the same time, I could hear this, banging noise, like someone hitting the walls on both sides of me. Not random either, it had rhythm to it. I tried to get up, and it felt like my whole body was suddenly just completely numb. I managed to move eventually, but it was like I couldn't control it properly. I kept falling over trying to get to my parents' room, and when I finally got there, the same figure was standing near them. Tried to yell, nothing came out, and then I woke up. I looked into that one later, and yeah, it lines up pretty well with sleep paralysis, so again, I didn't think too much of it on its own. Another time, I fell asleep on the couch and had one of those sort of woke up but didn't actually wake up sort of loops. Don't know if you've ever experienced it, but it's kind of weird. Like, I would get up, fall over, then suddenly I'm back where I started. Happened multiple times in a row as well. At one point, I thought that I saw my dad standing nearby, but something was off about it. I couldn't see his face clearly, and the details didn't really match, but again, could be explained by sleep stuff. I get that. Now, the reason that I'm not fully writing this off is because of what's been happening while I'm actually awake lately. The first thing was my headset. I keep it on a stand next to my desk. Pretty stable, doesn't just fall over or anything. A few times I'd leave the room and I would come back and they would be on the floor. I blamed my cats straight away at first, but then one night I'm in bed, both cats are with me, one literally lying on my chest and the other asleep across the room, and I hear a noise. I look over, and the headset is suddenly on the ground, but not just fallen, it was a bit away from the desk now, like it had just been dropped straight down. Still didn't really freak me out, I guess, but I just didn't really have an explanation for how that happened. Well, the next thing was my door. I was sitting at my computer one day and I heard it creak behind me, so I turned around and it was slowly opening. There was no one else in that part of the house at the time, no windows open either, so it wasn't like a draft or a gust or anything. But I got up and shut it properly and went back to what I was doing, trying not to overthink it. But it's the last thing that actually happened that really got to me. So I was asleep and had another one of those sort of can't move properly dreams, but this time it didn't feel exactly the same. In fact, at some point I woke up properly, at least I think I did, and I swear to you that I felt something grab my foot and pull. Not a light touch as well, enough that my leg actually moved. I grabbed my phone straight away and turned the flashlight on. Both cats were across the room together, nowhere near the bed, and they looked wide-eyed and freaked out. That's the point where I stopped being relaxed about it too. And since then, I've been sleeping with a light on most nights. I know that sounds really stupid, but I just haven't had the same kind of dreams as often when I do that. The physical stuff hasn't completely stopped, but it's less frequent, I would say. But it's the timing of everything and the overlap between the dreams and the stuff happening while I'm awake that's really starting to throw me off and make me think that there's something else here. I don't really know what to make of all of this. I certainly don't have a label for it. I just know that I didn't have any of this happening before moving into this place, and it all started within a couple of weeks of being there. If anyone out there has had similar stuff happen to them, especially the mix of sleep paralysis type dreams and actual things moving, please do let me know what you ended up putting it down to, because I'm trying to land on something that actually makes sense so that maybe I can finally do something about it. So this happened mid-2021 when I was studying and working evenings at a small hotel. It was a business hotel near a train station. Late shift was pretty predictable there. Check people in, answer some basic questions, then wait around until it's time to close things up. That night, it was just me and one coworker. We worked together a lot, so most of the time we were just talking to pass the time once the main check-in rush was done. Around maybe 7 p.m, I would say, this group walks in. 2 adults and a kid. Straight away something felt off about them too, but not in a sort of dramatic way. More like your brain notices something that just isn't matching expectations, but you can't quite put your finger on it. The guy was really tall and thin, wearing hiking gear, even though it wasn't that kind of area. The woman looked completely different style-wise, like overly dressed compared to him. The kid was maybe 8 or 9 years old, and just sort of stood there, not looking around, not fidgeting, nothing. All 3 of them, as well, were eerily still. Normally, families are talking, asking questions, kids messing around and whatnot, but these 3, they didn't say anything unless I asked directly, and even then it was really short answers. No small talk, no eye contact beyond what was necessary. While I was checking them in, the whole reception area just felt really tense too. Not loud and not aggressive, but just quiet in a way that made you aware of it. My coworker stopped talking completely, which was not like her at all. I gave them their keys, explained where the lifts were, standard stuff. They walked off together without saying anything else. The second that they were out of sight, though, the feeling just suddenly dropped, like it wasn't there anymore. My coworker immediately goes, "That was weird, right?" And I said, "Yeah, but we didn't really go deeper than that. I mean, you do get odd guests from time to time." Anyway, maybe 15 minutes later, another guest comes in. Normal interaction, she's asking about places to eat, we're giving suggestions, nothing unusual. I sent her toward the lift area. And from the desk, you can't see inside of the lift, but you can definitely hear it, and she presses the button, doors open, and there's a pause. She says, "Oh, sorry," like she's walked in on someone, then the doors close again. A few seconds later, she walks back to us and asks if there's another lift. We ask why, and she says that there's a family already inside, but they're just sort of standing there and not selecting a floor. That's when it clicked for both of us at the same time. We go over to check, half expecting it to be nothing. I press the call button and the doors open immediately. And it's them. The same 3 people, in the same positions as before. They're not talking, not moving, not even reacting to the doors opening. They're all facing forward like they're waiting, but no one's pressing anything. I remember looking at the panel, no floor selected. We stood there for a few seconds just trying to process it. It had been maybe at least 10 minutes since they had left the desk, and my coworker asks them if everything's okay. There's a delay, like a couple of seconds too long. Then the woman turns her head slightly and says, "Yes, everything is fine," in a really sort of monotone tone. The guy then reaches over and presses their floor. The doors close, and that's it. We waited a bit, called the lift back again and sent the other guest up. She even said something like, "That was strange," before leaving. When we got back to the desk, neither of us really knew what to say about that. We went over the obvious explanations. I mean, maybe they were tired, maybe there was a language barrier, maybe they got confused. But standing in the lift for that long without pressing anything, all 3 of them, and not reacting when the doors opened the first time, that's the part that really just doesn't line up for me. We checked later in the system just out of curiosity as well, and that's when we found out that their booking wasn't even there. We contacted security because we thought that, well, maybe people that shouldn't be here had somehow snuck in, and they checked around the whole place, but they never did find them. We had no complaints, no issues reported from anybody else, and there was nothing left behind. I've worked plenty of late shifts before, and after that, dealt with drunk people, difficult guests, all the usual stuff that you can think of. But that was the only time that I've seen something where I just couldn't at least land on a reasonable explanation for the behavior. Even now when it comes up, me and my coworker remember the same details. The timing, the way that they were standing, the delay before responding. It was all just so weird. And then, to top it all off, to find out that they weren't even booked for the hotel and that the security couldn't find them anywhere, and it's honestly like they just disappeared. I don't know. It's something that I still think about often, and it was just off in a way that has always stuck. I'm still shaking from this, and I've never experienced anything like it in my life before. I don't even know if I'm going to explain it properly, but here goes nothing. So last week, I went to Savannah. I was visiting some friends. Let's call them Mike, Carly, and their friend Patrick. Now, I don't believe in ghosts or spirits or demons or anything like that. I never have, but after what happened, I honestly don't know what to think anymore. We were checking out some of the smaller St. Patrick's Day's festivities downtown, and then ended up hopping between bars. The last bar that we went to was called the Rusty Lantern. Keep in mind, it was maybe 11:45 p.m. at this point, and the place was pretty much empty. I think that there was only one other table besides ours as well. We were talking, laughing, the usual, but when I started noticing small things that felt off, a tall guy in shiny red boots walked in, circled the bar area, and then walked back out. He did this twice as well. The third time that he came in with 2 other people, they lined up and started moving like they were dancing, but it was awkward, jerky, and off sync, like somebody was playing a broken loop in a video game, and the whole thing was just so odd. Then it got worse. A man walked in carrying a small cardboard box. It looked like a pizza delivery at first. But then I saw him leave, come back, same box, same spot, multiple times, 5 or 6 times, exactly the same, like somebody was hitting rewind almost. None of it made any sense, and it wasn't subtle by any means. My friends thought that I was overreacting, but then another guy at the bar started waving at Mike like they were old friends reconnecting. Mike awkwardly played along, clearly confused. At this point, I felt my chest tighten, my skin crawl a bit. The physical sense of dread was really real now. I decided to get up and go to the bathroom just to get away from all of this. When I came out, I told my friends that we needed to leave. They hesitated at first, so I started walking it alone, and that's when it really hit me. On the sidewalk, a small group of people had appeared. I made eye contact with one of them, a woman, and I had this sudden, undeniable sense that they were not human. I don't mean that they looked scary. I mean my brain immediately registered that something was off about them. And the worst part, I knew that they knew that I knew. I ran back inside in a panic, grabbed my friends, and we left immediately. Outside, the streets were completely empty. No cars, no pedestrians, nothing. The oppressive feeling of fear was so strong that I even started crying right there on the sidewalk. Mike tried to comfort me, but it didn't help. Then, out of nowhere, the friend from the bar, this guy who was waving at Mike, pulled up in a black SUV. He screamed at us for a few seconds, floored it, and vanished in a blink. The whole thing was so weird and surreal. As we walked away, the feeling of dread faded a little bit, but then it hit me again a few blocks down, just for a moment, but enough that it made me tense up again. Even now, I cannot shake that sensation, like something was following or observing me. We got back to our Airbnb eventually, though, and thankfully nothing else happened that night. But the entire experience, it's something that has really stayed with me. The looping people, the non-human presence that I suspected was there, the SUV appearing and disappearing like that. I mean, none of it makes sense. Has anyone here experienced anything like this before, where you just know that the person that you're speaking to isn't human? Or am I just losing it? Or was something genuinely off that night? I was living with my parents at the time, and I was about 16 years old. Pretty normal house, no history, no haunted house vibes or anything like that. I was asleep in my room, on my side facing the wall, and at some point during the night I sort of woke up. Not like half asleep dreaming as well. I mean, I was aware of the room and everything. I could see my door, my desk, the window, everything where it should be. But then I noticed someone standing near the end of my bed. At first, I thought it was one of my parents checking on me or something, but that didn't really make sense right away because the shape was wrong. They was way too tall and they were still as a statue. My eyes adjusted a bit, and it was then that I could make out a full silhouette. Not just it's dark so I can't see them, but actually darker than everything else in the room, even the night itself, like it was blocking out what little light was actually there anymore. It looked like a person wearing some kind of a brimmed hat. Not exaggerated, but just clearly there. I tried to sit up to say something, and that's when I realized that I couldn't move, like at all, not even a little bit. I couldn't turn my head, couldn't lift my arm, nothing. I could feel my whole body trying to move, but it just wasn't responding. At that point it clicked that something was seriously wrong, and I went straight into panic mode, heart racing, trying to force myself to move, but nothing was happening. The figure didn't move either. It just stayed there, facing me. I couldn't see a face properly, but I had the strong sense that it was looking directly at me. Now, I've had nightmares before, and this did not feel like that. Usually in dreams, things shift or they don't make much sense. This was just my room, exactly how it was, with something added that shouldn't be there. After a bit, the panic turned into frustration more than anything. Like, I went from "I'm scared" to "why can't I move anymore?" I was trying to shout, but I couldn't even make a sound at this point. Eventually, I shut my eyes because I didn't want to keep looking at it. I don't know how long that lasted. Could have been seconds or a minute. But when I opened them again, I could move, and the figure was now gone. I sat up straight away, checked the whole room, turned the light on, but there was nothing there. The door was open, window locked, no one in the house had been up. I didn't go back to sleep that night. I just stayed there trying to figure out what had just happened. The next day I told myself that it was just a nightmare or something like that. But the part that didn't line up was just how aware I was of everything. It felt like I woke up first and then saw it, not the other way around. Also, I later came to find out that apparently my mother saw something move towards my bedroom that night. She said that it looked like a shadow, but she wasn't sure what it was. A few days later, though, I looked into it properly and found out about sleep paralysis. The symptoms matched almost exactly. Waking up, not being able to move, seeing someone in the room, intense fear, all that stuff. That explanation made sense, so I stuck to it. But here's the part that really still bothers me. You see, I hadn't heard of that shadow person with a hat before. Like, I didn't go into it with that idea already in my head or anything. And when I later saw people describing basically the same shape, the same position, end of the bed, just watching, it felt way too specific. I've never had it happen again since then. My mother has not experienced this, as far as I know anyway, and neither has my father. There's no repeats, no similar experiences, and thankfully that's the only time that it's ever really happened. But that one time was enough that I don't dismiss people right away anymore when they say that they've seen something. The fact that my mother saw something too, I guess, is maybe corroborating evidence. There's clearly something going on with the brain in that state, at the very least, that can feel completely real. Still, I don't sleep facing the open part of my room anymore. Not because I think that there's something there, but, well, just because I don't feel like testing it, I suppose. So, a quick disclaimer before I begin. I've always considered myself a skeptic. No ghosts, no spirits, no supernatural crap. I was raised in a pretty standard Christian household, but by the time that I was 12, I'd already convinced myself that most of that was nonsense. I still hear my parents' stories about weird stuff happening when they were kids, but honestly, they always sounded like campfire exaggerations, if anything. That said, something happened to me that I still cannot explain, and it sticks out so vividly that I remember it like it happened yesterday. It was 2005, and my family had just moved into a new house. The place wasn't particularly old, maybe 15 years at most. Standard suburban cookie-cutter sort of design. My sister and I were about 10 and 8 at the time, but we were still settling in, and since there wasn't really much to do after school besides homework and the occasional TV show, we started this routine of watching American Idol together as a family. It was one of the few times everyone was actually in the living room at the same time, so I really looked forward to it. It was a typical evening too. We'd get home, have dinner, scramble for first in the shower, then change into PJs and head downstairs. Our shower situation absolutely sucked at the time. The one in my parents' room barely worked, and ours ran out of hot water quickly as well, so whoever went second basically had a freezing shower. The layout was a bit weird too. The hallway leading to the bathroom was really narrow, and the stairwell at the front of the house had a spiral design that always made me slightly uneasy. Nothing had happened there before, it just sort of felt a bit off, I guess. Anyway, One night after dinner, my mum told us to go and shower and change before the show started. My sister took off running toward the stairs, screaming like a little idiot, in a fun way. I chased her, slipping slightly on the carpeted stairs as we laughed. She was ahead, and I tried grabbing her foot to stop her, but she made it to the top and darted toward the bathroom. And here's where things get a bit weird. So I followed her and expect the usual door slammed, lights on, her standing there ready to prank me or whatever. But instead, there was nothing. No slam, no sound. In fact, no sign of her. I step in and she's gone. The shower's empty, lights are off. My first thought was that she must have run into my parents' room. I mean, that makes sense, right? But as I creep toward their room, the lights are still off and there's no one there. My mum calls out asking if I'm showering, but my sister's apparently sitting in the living room in front of the TV, and allegedly she's been there the whole time. But I remember the sensation of chasing her so clearly, the carpet under my hands as I lunged around the banister, the sound of her laughter, her nightgown brushing against me, but she wasn't actually moving in front of me. Something in that hallway suddenly felt very wrong. I didn't feel fear, but just this sort of intense confusion, like my brain was trying to process two conflicting realities at once. I told myself that I must have imagined it at the time. Maybe I dozed off for a second while running or something, or maybe my memory combined multiple moments. But one thing I'm sure of is that it wasn't a dream. I mean, I remember physically touching her foot, hearing her laugh, feeling the banister under my hand, and yet she apparently had never moved. Years later, I mentioned it to my parents, and they just laughed, recalling the old stories that I'd heard growing up about funny things happening in that house. Doors closing on their own, shadows in the hallway. I don't think that theirs were exactly the same as mine, but it confirmed that my house had some quirks, I guess you could say. Still, nothing ever scared me as a kid quite like that night. Now I sometimes wonder if it was like a glitch in perception or something. Sleep deprivation, the chaos of moving into a new house, a trick of the hallway lighting or something. But it felt so real. It was a full-body, multi-sensory experience. I even recall the smell of the carpet, the faint smell of the shower steam that my sister's nightgown fabric had on it, the sound of the TV from downstairs, all of it. Even now, thinking about it makes the back of my neck tingle. I cannot explain it. I don't know if it was some kind of hallucination, like I said, maybe a child memory sort of merging with imagination, or something else entirely, but I know that it was real enough that I never forgot it. And so my question for all of you guys is, what do you think about this? And has anyone else here ever experienced anything like this? Something completely mundane and completely normal in the right context, but then instantly made impossible like this. Something that didn't scare you at the time, but left your brain questioning reality for, well, literally decades now.
During high school, both my parents worked and I would be home alone after school until around 7 p.m. Normally, I would come home and mess around on the computer in my basement until my parents came home. Right above this area is the kitchen, the laundry room, which are connected to the garage. Every so often after school, I heard footsteps sometimes above me in the kitchen. I blamed it on the house settling and never really took it too seriously. But one day after school, something happened that I could not explain away with pipes. You see, I was on the computer like usual and heard the door to the garage from the laundry room open. The alarm makes a beep when someone opens the exterior door. Then, there were footsteps from the laundry room into the kitchen, and the sound of a woman chatting loudly like she was talking on a cell phone. Thinking that my mum had come home early, I went upstairs to see her. When I opened the basement door, I was greeted with a pitch-black house. I called out, "Mum?" Silence. Hello? No response. Now, scared out of my mind, I turned a few lights on and looked around. That's when I discovered that all the doors were locked. There were no cars in the garage, and really nothing was missing. At this point, I was freaking out a little bit and went back to the safety of the basement. Weird, I know, thinking that the basement is safe, but once my mum came home, I asked if she was home earlier, and of course, she said that she wasn't. I've reached the point where I can't keep it to myself, and I need someplace semi-anonymous to just get it off my chest so I can move on. So I was a part of a trio of best friends. We would hang out socially pretty regularly. One of our favorite things to do was to girls' night out at the local clubs. We always started at one of our least favorite clubs, but it had one of those inexpensive fishbowl drinks, so we typically began our evening there. And this is where it happened. We had arrived, and we're about 30 to 45 minutes into conversation and drinks, and we decided to hit the dance floor. A group of 3 guys were seated near the dance floor and joined us once we were started dancing. I was paired up with the youngest looking one. He looked about 5 or so years younger than myself, but we were having a great time dancing together. We danced and merged back together with the entire group, forming a circle. Directly across from my dance partner and myself was my friend. She was laughing and smiling, dancing and enjoying herself, and then it was like, I don't know, a hologram or shifting picture, like tuning an image. She suddenly stood well over our heads, and the guy that I was dancing with looked about 5'11" or so, and she was clear ahead and shoulders over him. Now, this is the part that I have the hardest time saying without ridiculing myself for not having the answer. Please, I have such a hard time saying it even to myself, but she was a reptile, like a standing, scale-covered, muscular, humanish creature with a dinosaur, human-shaped head. My dance partner and we both immediately froze. I felt stuck, just sort of staring and willing myself to stop staring. I turned to look at him, and the color had drained from his face. I felt so bad for the fear on his face, but without a word to each other, we both stepped backwards, turned, and we fled outside. We kept walking, completely left the club. He didn't say a word, and he just walked off. He left his friends there, and he was gone. I went back inside because I thought it had to be the lighting, the shadows, or something practical. After all, I know this person. We're friends, best friends at that time. So I'm certainly the one who was crazy, and I needed to understand what had just happened. I sat at a table near the dance floor and watched the whole room, the lighting, effects, shadows, my friends dancing, and I just told myself that it had to be an optical illusion. A terrifying one, but it couldn't have been real. I know this person. I'm not prone to fantasies, so I must have been the one to have my vision scrambled enough for my brain to fill in wrong information. It unsettled me so much that I decided not to continue the evening out. I said goodbye to the other friend who was with us, and I went home. As soon as I got home, I searched the internet for anyone who had experienced anything remotely similar, and I didn't find anything. At that point, I did try, and have continued to try, to convince myself that it was the room, the lights, the strobe effect, etc., that turned my best friend into a 7-foot-tall reptile person. But I avoided them for a month after that. The next time that I saw them, though, I thought that she would find it pretty amusing that I ghosted everyone because she shapeshifted. She didn't find it amusing, though, and seemed worried about it, asking me what she looked like, etc. Fair enough, I thought. If my lunatic friend said the same thing to me, I would have questions too. I turned it into a bit of a joke and tried to move the conversation away from it. But sometimes I get reminded, and I see it again in my mind, and am still as frightened and confused about it as I was then. We all grew apart after that. But there, I said it now, and who knows, maybe just getting it out of my head will make the memory finally go away. I always had this one stuffed animal growing up. I would carry that stuffed dog everywhere I went. He was my homie, and I called him Doggy. I don't remember the specific age that I was, but around that time my stuffed animals became more of a sleep buddy than something that I brought along with me, but still having a huge attachment to it. Anyways, it was one summer night, and I remember Mum making me go to bed. I would do my routine of brushing teeth, turning on the nightlight, and tucking Doggy in beside me. The nightlight was one of those sweet 2000s rotating fish tank lamps. Anyways, after a while, I'm still awake alone in bed just watching those fish go around and around. At one point, I remember starting to feel scared, like the energy of the room just sort of dramatically shifted. Trying to distract myself by contently studying the fish and count every time the clownfish circles back, it suddenly turns off, and my reaction was to quickly get up and turn it on as fast as I could. I sit up and then instantly get pulled back down. Suddenly, it felt like my body was restrained with a massive weight, unable to move anything. Laying there motionless, I noticed my stuffed animal slowly rise vertically from the bed. I became absolutely mortified as I see him pause halfway up and slowly transcend into the walls. As Doggy was passing inside the wall, it had an almost ripple-like effect to it. I can't fully explain it, but stray visions of like crimson, orange, and metallic. It was all such an intense feeling of sadness and terror, as I thought that I would never see Doggy again. After that, he was legit gone. I got up panicking, trying to search for him and still unsure of what had actually happened. And that night, I ended up crying myself to sleep because of it. In the morning, I ran downstairs to tell my mother, and I saw Doggy on the counter. My mum was angry because she thought that I'd used her razor blades to shave the stuffed animal. Doggy only had small patches of fur left and looked almost completely shaved. More like all the little fur that he had were plucked out almost. I tried to explain what happened, but it was exactly like a movie trope where the parent is completely dismissive of the kid seeing something freaky. She decided at this point that I was too old for it, that I'd crossed a boundary, and hid him away from me. I was devastated again. Now, a few days later, I get this massive pain in my abdomen, and it's actually unbearable. It gets to a point that my mum takes me to a doctor, which was kind of a big deal to go to see a doctor from our family. I end up getting an x-ray, and they find massive clumps of fur in my stomach. I don't remember what the doctor said, but my mum said that they found a bunch of fur in my stomach, and that was what was causing my pain. I was fine, but my mum thought that I was actually binge-eating fur off my stuffed animals, and took them all away. I felt so wronged for that at the time, and I'm still upset about what happened to Doggy and me getting punished for it. I had to switch rooms and slept with my older brother instead, because I couldn't actually get any sleep without another person in the room at this stage. I tell this story all the time now, and I still can't fully comprehend or express it in words that make any sense. I still do have Doggy around, somewhere in one of my boxes. He is definitely aged a bit and is a bit raggedy, but still looks pretty good for coming back from, well, hell. This is one of my first experiences with the paranormal that I can confidently say was not just a trick of the mind, and it's the only time that I've seen something so clearly. Back when I was in middle school, we had a school trip over one weekend to a camp. The class was split up to have a cabin for the boys and a cabin for the girls. Now, the layout of the girls' cabin was an open main room where you came inside, with 2 bunk beds in the left corner, with a single bed between them, and a closed-off small room in the right corner for the teachers to sleep in. There were then bathrooms to the right, and a long room to the left where there were 2 rows of more bunk beds. The rest of the girls filled up that long room, so my friend group got to use the beds in the open room, with me being in one of the bottom bunks. The first night went as you'd expect to, staying up late, laughing and just messing around, then passing out for the whole night. The second night was a bit different though. We were all asleep by midnight, but I ended up waking up sometime later. I used my flip phone to check the time, and it wasn't long after 2 a.m. I sat up a bit to stretch and turn over in bed, away from the wall, but once I was almost completely turned over and to my other side, I froze. I could see someone standing in the middle of the open room. A boy, pale with short blonde hair, wearing a simple t-shirt and shorts, stood in the middle of the girls' cabin, staring at me. The moonlight from the window between the bunk beds gave me a good view of him, and he looked just like any random kid you'd see at a camp, except he had no eyes. There were just black voids where his eyes should have been. Even still, I can only describe it as he was staring at me, and so I just sat there and stared back. I must have stared at him for a good 15 seconds before I started to slowly reach for the small flashlight that I kept next to my phone on the bed. I never looked away from him as I brought the flashlight up and turned it on. The room was suddenly bright and the boy was nowhere to be found. I turned the light back off soon after, not wanting to wake anyone, but I heard my friend on the bunk above me speak up. She simply asked if I had seen him too, and I replied yeah before turning back over to go back to sleep, facing the wall again. It took a while to fall back to sleep after that, but eventually I managed. And at least we were heading back home that day. Have you ever turned around and thought that you saw something, but it turned out to be a tree stump or just some other random object? Well, this would happen to me often as an avid hiker, so I'm definitely used to it. But this time was distinctly different. This was 4 to 5 years ago now, and it just popped back up into my head. I still remember it very vividly, and I know exactly where it took place. This was on the Sulphur Springs Trail in Natural Bridge, Virginia. I've hiked it many times, and this was a typical sunny day. I was turning a corner and had one of those moments where I thought that I saw something. But this still gives me the chills today because this time it was different. I looked to the right because I thought someone snuck up on me and was trying to pass me. Except there wasn't a hiker there. The trail isn't that popular anyway, but instead, I vividly saw someone about 5 feet away, wearing a very old military uniform and holding an old rifle. Instead of seeing it disappear instantly and finding a tree stump in its place, it lingered too, just a fraction of a second longer, and there was no possible object in its place that would have fooled my vision. This was towards the beginning of the hike, which is very easy, so I wasn't tired at all or anything. Everything was well lit, and I never thought about paranormal stuff as it's not really interesting to me, and I don't believe in the supernatural. And this whole thing just blew my mind. I'm still not really sure what to think of it. I've never done any drugs and I barely touch alcohol, so really I just have no explanation. Me and my friend group, around the same age as me, all love one thing: sailing. So in the event of a boat race in a lake in Italy, where we all come from, we decided to participate enthusiastically. Since it was a lake hosting the race, there was a lot of green and campings nearby, and my friend suggested that we spend the night, that we would have to sleep there anyway in one of the campings. So we brought our tents and sleeping mats, and we found the perfect spot eventually, kind of isolated and with a beautiful view of the lake. There was one small issue though. The camping was more like an open space in a little forest, so we were surrounded by trees, with the only way to get out and in a narrow dirt road. We parked the camper there, and us teens prepared for the sleep outside while the adults slept in the camper. We had a ton of fun as well, joking, starting a fire, all the things that you do on a camping trip. When it was time to sleep, we all went into our tents and sort of drifted off into our dreams. Well, I hoped so for my friends, but not for me. I just couldn't sleep that night, probably because of the uncountable number of cokes that I downed just a few hours prior. As I stared at the tent ceiling, though, I started to have this gut feeling that we weren't alone in there, that there was something, or even worse, someone, there with us. I tried not to think too much of it, and I tried to get to sleep, until I heard a loud sound of a tree branch breaking, and I wasn't the only one who heard it too, as my friend, who was in the tent with me, suddenly woke up and whispered, "What was that?" I simply told him that it was probably an animal wandering around and broke a tree branch on the ground, as that often occurs in forests like this. As I was explaining this, though, my friend signed for me to shut up and listen. It was then that we both heard footsteps. That's what ran through my mind as soon as I heard leaves and branches moving on the ground. And what happened next, though, was scary. We were suddenly woken up by the camper's anti-theft alarm going off. We all peeked out of our tents just to see a silhouette of a man running away in the woods and a crowbar near the camper's front right door. Thankfully, the alarm went off and scared the thief, because if that didn't happen, most likely all of our belongings that were inside the camper would have been stolen. Or, who knows, maybe something much worse. This is one of those memories from probably 23 or 24 years ago that I genuinely hate myself for not being able to remember all of the details. But I thought that I'd share what I can remember, and it'll be a little bit shorter because of that. I'm almost positive I was driving on the road where my friend's family had land that we would go camping at when this happened, and that it was either him or another friend of ours in the car with me. I thought that it was this other friend of mine, and I asked him about it, but he doesn't remember it, so he doesn't think that it was him. I truly wish that I could remember who it was with so that I could confirm this stuff and maybe get some more details. Anyway, it was late at night on a very rural and wooded road. Not a gravel road, but a narrow, older asphalt road. As we're driving 40 miles per hour or so, I noticed that there was an object on the road up ahead, and as I got closer I could see that it was glowing. I started to slow down, and once we were about 20 yards away I stopped. We approached the object, and it was a small rectangular lantern with a lit candle inside, in the middle of the road. There were no cars around, and I'm not even sure that there were any houses or cabins or anything in the immediate area. I'm pretty sure both of us got the same sinking feeling at the exact same time, and simultaneously said, "Let's get out of here." We jumped back in the car and we floored it out of there. I watched the mirror, and my buddy was looking back, but we didn't see anything. We were both just like, what the heck was that? I mean, it's for sure in a very, very rural wooded area with very few houses around, like maybe 1 or 2 houses every couple of miles or so. And in that spot there was, well, nothing but woods on both sides of the road. Was it just a prank? But who and why? And in such a secluded area? Him and I both felt like it was a trap of some sort, but for what? Who knows, I guess, but we definitely were not hanging around to find out, and I'm glad that we left immediately instead of lingering any longer. My question for all of you guys, though, is, has anyone else come across something like this before? And if you have, what was it all about? So I was at a building, a doctor's office, sitting outside in the smoking section. It's the perfect spot to see inside the building, as all doors and windows are very clear. You can completely see through to the other side of the building, in fact. So, in this way, it's very easy to see people coming and going from either side of the building. While outside smoking, I happened to look up as I saw a lady leaving. I never saw her full face, and because of that, this is why I keep telling myself that it was just someone who looked similar. But from what I saw, she looked exactly like me, though. The difference was that her hair was longer, which, ironically, looks just like mine, except I recently cut it. She also had a sweater that I've never seen anyone own nor wear. I wasn't wearing it that day, but it was mine. And that lady who looked like me, she was wearing the exact same sweater. I even remember contemplating wearing it that very day. I was honestly so caught off guard that I sat in a state of shock for several seconds, maybe even a good minute, trying to tell myself to get up and go to the other side and see who this lady was, or meet her or something. But I had the funniest feeling that even if I ran with all my might, she would be gone by the time that I turned the corner outside. I kept my eyes locked for several more minutes. She was already gone, though, walking towards the parking lot area. I stared, waiting to see a car drive by the parking lot on the other side. I guess it was my way of confirming to myself that it was just another person, nothing really weird. Maybe someone just going on a lunch break, you know. I sat, though, for a half an hour watching, and I never saw her, never saw a vehicle drive by that could have been her. Nothing. Now, I wasn't going to share this, but after last night, it's gotten me more paranoid. My husband and I had our date night, kids with his parents for the night, and we were just drinking and watching One Piece on Netflix at home. And at some point in my drunk state, I went to take the dogs outside to the bathroom. I waited until they came in. Dogs ran into the living room with the hubby, and I decided to lay down in the laundry room on the floor. What's weird, though, is when I came back, my husband swore that I went to the bathroom and came from that direction. I started giggling, thinking that he was pulling my leg or something, and I said, no, I just brought the dogs in. I was laying down in the laundry room for a few minutes. We both end up going through our camera footage as we have cams in and outside of the home. And there is video of me going and coming from the bathroom area, but it didn't capture me going to the laundry room. And there was an extra recording of nothing, which I said was when I was on the floor. Unfortunately, you don't see or hear me there, but my husband said that I was in the room with him, and I said that that was the time that I was in the laundry room. We even see where the dogs were coming in from, and it freaked us out. We kept trying to figure out the time frame of everything, thinking that maybe I drank more than I thought, and I'm just getting my time mixed up. We got tired, though, as it was late, trying to figure it out, and in the end we just headed to bed. As we did, both of our dogs went off barking in the living room and near the front door. And really, the only time that they do this is if someone is walking up or on the property. My pit is very good at knowing someone coming up into the land before they even get to the driveway, So naturally I run to the door and my husband runs behind me to the door and we go out to the porch and, well, there's just nothing there. It was freaky though because she really never barks unless there was actually somebody there or trying to talk to you. We actually caught someone trying to jump our fence once thanks to her, in fact. My husband caught them as they were walking towards it because of her notifying us. Anyway, we ended up locking everything up and we went to bed, only for it to happen again. Just as we lied in bed, both dogs go off and run to the front door. This time my husband gets his gun and goes walking outside with the dogs. One was just searching and sniffing, and our pet kept standing still by the door, as if guarding it and giving gruffs under her breath, almost as if she was saying, "I know you're out there." She kept looking for someone or something, but she never took off. In the end, we found nothing, neither did the dogs. My hubby chalked it up to being random animals and her just having really good hearing. But me, I'm getting paranoid. I guess I'm hoping people will tell me that I'm making a mountain out of a molehill here, but I don't know. Something tells me that I'm not. So my girlfriend and I arrive at a remote stretch of forest around dusk. We saw two strange-looking men sitting on some rocks, but didn't think much about it. We drove 2 to 3 miles further into the forest, and eventually we set up camp. 30 to 45 minutes later, it was dark at this point, one of the two guys walked up to our camp and yelled, "Hello." I responded, and he asked to walk through our camp. I asked him why, and he said that he needed to reach the other side of the creek. He walked around our car, and once he saw my girlfriend, stopped and asked some strange questions. Eventually, he crossed the creek, walked into some bushes, and turned off his light. I stood at the bank of the creek, watching him, and he just stared back at me for around 5 minutes. He eventually walked away, and it was then that we threw everything in the car and we just left. Also, there was nothing on the other side of the creek that he crossed. No campsite, no trails, nothing. And so it was really weird behavior. I didn't think much about it until he turned off his light and stood in the bushes. And also, something that always plagues my mind is, where was the second guy? There were no other campers at this stretch of forest, and we didn't see any vehicles. We were at the very last campsite on the road, and really there was nothing beyond us. So my brothers and I were 8, 7, and 4 when this happened, and as such, my youngest brother, who was 4 years old at the time, really has no recollection of this day. I was 8 though, and I remember most of what happened because I know that we scared my nan, pop, uncles, and parents more than I'd ever seen them scared before or since. You might be asking where the paranormal comes into this. Well, you see, my brother, who was 7 at the time, agrees with me that we weren't gone for more than an hour. We couldn't have been. Not to mention that we swear that our nan looked straight at us and even waved to us, but she swore up until her death that she never saw us that day. First things first though, there's some needed background here. 4 times a year, we spend time as a family in a cabin that we own that we call the castle. The castle sits at a man-made dam named Wyangala in New South Wales, Australia. My brothers and I, we always had the same rules to follow growing up. We couldn't go past the valley at the bottom of the castle or past the hills that the castle sat between. The day that this happened, well, we broke those rules. On this trip, we had our nan and pop, mum and dad, and 2 of our uncles. So, 5 a.m. on the day in question, my brothers and I were up, dressed and playing Bob the Builder cones and ladders. Nan was complaining about us waking her up and told us to go and play, but to be back for breakfast at 7:30. Keep in mind, this was in 2004 in the middle of nowhere, Australia. The biggest danger to us were the kangaroos or maybe the snakes and spiders. Being the big sister, my job was to watch my little brothers and to make sure that we followed the rules. But for some reason this day, we thought that it would be cool to walk past the valley and up the hill on the other side to stand up the top and watch the sun come up over the water of the dam. I confidently decided that we could watch the sun come up and be back in time for breakfast, and if we stayed on the road that went over the valley, then we could be seen from the castle at all times if someone was to look for us. So we set off on our little journey. After this, I really have no idea what happened, be it a glitch in the Matrix or a time slip or something else, who knows. Either way, we made it to the top of the hill, the sun was coming up and everything was great. We were up there no more than 10 minutes and, according to the wristwatch that I had, it was about 6 in the morning. So we set off back down the hill, we reached the valley, we stopped to look into it for about a minute. We can see the bottom clear as day and decided, as most young kids would, to adventure down the valley and back up the other side. We have an hour and a half to kill and surely it wouldn't take that long, so off we went. We sort of had to zigzag back and forth to avoid thorn bushes, loose rocks and spinifex, a spiky and painful grass here, but tried to stay as straight as possible. When we reached the bottom of the valley, I again checked the time and it was roughly 6:15. We looked up the other side and, to our surprise, our Nan was standing on the edge of the valley. She waved down at us. We thought that we were going to get yelled at, but she just sort of smiled and walked away. We thought that we were in the clear. We started on our way back up, doing much the same as before. We were laughing and talking about whatever kids talk about when we finally made it up out of the valley. Just as we walked out onto the road, Nan came screaming at us from the castle. She was demanding to know where we had been. I looked at my brothers and back at her before pointing at the valley, too scared to speak. Nan pulled us all into a hug and started crying. She started yelling at us that we needed to get into the car so that we could go find our pop, parents, and uncles. Apparently, they were all out searching for us. We didn't say anything and just followed her, and it wasn't until we were all seated in the car that I spotted the time on the dash. Apparently, it was now 7 p.m., and rather than the sun rising, it was setting. I looked down at my watch and, sure enough, it showed the same time. I remember showing it to my 7-year-old brother, who was just as confused as I was. February last year, our Nan passed rather unexpectedly, and at her funeral my dad asked if we remember the day that we disappeared. He even joked about if it was him and our uncle that he'd bet his last dollar that she wouldn't have cared, but because we were her precious grandkids, she was beyond terrified. My youngest brother had no clue what we were talking about, but my other brother and I, we remembered. We told our dad what had happened from our point of view. He told us that no one, not even Nan, had seen us that day. He told us that Nan never left the castle for fear that we'd come back and no one would be there. He then filled us in on their side of the story, which we didn't know up until this point. So apparently, Mum had gotten up at around 6:30 when she realized that my brothers and I were being too quiet. She looked around the castle and, in our little hideout, she even apparently called out to us with no answer. She then woke everyone up to help her search. Mum then went to the ranger station to get their help searching, while Dad started walking the hills, and Pop took the 4-wheel drive tracks. My uncles offered to check the other cabins, the caravan park and the boat shed. In reality, they went to fish and chip in the caravan park and then to the next town over to get some ice cream and beer. They've since stated that they knew that we would turn up, so they weren't too worried. Nan stayed at the castle, though, and Mum and Dad both swear that they looked in the valley and they never saw us. Since last year too, my brothers have been to investigate the valley, and even Dad went, and they had a good look, and none of them could figure out how that we could have been hidden from sight there. And even by some chance, if we were hidden from sight, we definitely would have been heard. Our youngest brother said that even when our other brother was down in the valley, that he could hear him clear as day talking. Even if we did end up out of sight somehow and out of hearing range, there was no way that it could have taken us all day to walk back up the other side of the valley. We've walked it plenty of times since, and it's only taken us about 30 minutes at most to do it. And obviously, the creepiest thing about this whole thing is, well, who did we see if it wasn't Nan? Because it sure as heck looked exactly like her. This happened in 2013 when I was around 12. My mum moved me and my siblings in with my grandparents because we didn't have enough money for rent at the time, and she needed to save. It wasn't really a big deal though. They had plenty of room, and I got to spend a lot of time jewelry making with my grandma, which in my little eyes at the time was such a win that I didn't even realize that we were that poor. It was our little pastime after school, and one of my favorite parts was the trips that we would take to Michael's to get beads and materials occasionally. Michael's, for those who are unfamiliar, is a craft store similar to Hobby Lobby, and walking around in it is a little girl's dream when it comes to DIY stuff. And one day, in the late fall, we realized that we had run out of wire for a bracelet that I was making for my mum, so we headed to our local Michael's to get some more. This particular day was in winter, so it had already begun to get dark by 5 p.m. My grandma, having vision problems and a bad hip, entrusted little me to run in and grab the wire and pay for it, as we had done so many times together before. I was stubbornly independent, so she wasn't very worried about me. She parked right in the handicap spot in front of the store. The sun setting and the light from the big storefront windows illuminated her car behind me as I walked inside. Now, as I was standing by the display at the front, entranced by some Christmas decor or something, a man walked in through the sliding doors. I noticed him immediately. It was hard not to. He was tall. I think anyway. I mean, it's possible that I was just really short at the time. Maybe in his mid-30s with dark hair and wearing all black from head to toe. His clothes were a bit dirty, and I distinctly remember a big red D1 logo on his hoodie. He had his hand shoved into his pockets and walked briskly into the store, almost frantically in fact. I just sort of stood there and watched him. He made eye contact with me for a bit too long and then continued deeper into the store. I was immediately weirded out, but thought nothing else of it and went off to find that wire that I was looking for. I found my spool of wire, but getting distracted in the toy section was where I really messed up. That's when I noticed him start to follow me around. Aisle to aisle, I would be browsing and he would just appear at the other end, fake looking at stuff. He was muttering to himself constantly. You know when somebody sort of says something out loud expecting a response, but they aren't really directly looking at you? It was like that. As a kid, you don't really realize what's happening immediately, so I just awkwardly walked away from him each time, pretending not to notice him. In my little brain, I reasoned that he wasn't really following me and walked all the way across the store to the wedding aisle to look at some stuff that I had seen when I first walked in. I figured that there'd be no way that he would follow me there, but sure enough, while looking at the invitation cards, I get a spine-chilling feeling. I turn around and he is there, right behind me, back to me, doing something, messing with something in his pants too, doing something really vile to himself, I remember. I had never seen anything like that at that age, and the sunken eyes he looked at me with still haunt me to this day. It took me a minute to process what I had just seen, but once I did, I immediately booked it out of the store as fast as I could. Jumping into my grandma's car, she seemed startled by my sudden appearance and asked what I got. I tried to explain what had just happened when I saw him appear in the sliding door in front of us, and the dread that I felt in that moment was indescribable. He approached our car, obviously recognizing that I was with my grandma, and knocked on her window. I hadn't been able to explain myself in time before she cracked the window and asked him if everything was okay. The man gestured to me with that same crazy stare and said something along the lines of, "She's a thief, she stole from there." I was mortified. He was trying to make her suspect of me, on top of everything else that he had just put me through. Thankfully, my grandma got the same vibes I did because she politely told him to back away and rolled the window up while locking the door. He suddenly yanked at the door handle, then swung both his arms up and started banging down hard on the car's roof, causing us both to jump and me to start crying. My grandma slammed on the reverse and peeled out of there, and honestly, I've never seen her drive so quickly. I really don't remember much after that, just crying and holding a $17 spool of wire in my hands that I obviously hadn't paid for. We called the police as soon as we got home, and luckily they immediately took it very seriously and requested the videotapes from the Michaels. A few weeks later, and my grandma told me that they had actually found him. They mostly left me out of the investigation, besides taking my statement as to not traumatize me further, I guess. She got the dent in her car fixed, and really, that was that. It wasn't until a few years later that my mum finally told me what had happened to him. It turns out that he already had one battery charge and 2 sexual assaults on his record, one even being from a minor relative of his, like his niece or something. He had just gotten off work from the gas station across the street when he must have seen me walk into Michael's alone. I really don't know what would have happened if my grandma hadn't have locked her door when she did, or even if she had been in there with me, vulnerable to that man as well. So I dated this man for about 2.5 years and, well, he nearly killed me. Very physically abusive, emotionally, sexually, all of it. The last time that he hurt me was because I told him that I was moving and I was going to have a roommate. He didn't like that. He strangled me twice and punched me in the face. I escaped and called the cops, and he got arrested a few days later, thankfully. Until then, though, he was coaching me on how I needed to go back to law enforcement and state that I hit myself and he didn't really strangle me, that I stopped taking my psychiatric medication and was just having a psychotic break that night. At the first hearing, I recanted and told the judge all the lies my ex had told me to. The judge believed me, and he was set to get released from jail, but he was still under state county hold or something like that. Before he was supposed to get released, I went back to law enforcement after gaining some clarity and told them the truth again, in which another hearing was scheduled. Undoubtedly, my ex was notified the reason why another hearing was being scheduled. Now, he was a gang member. Obviously, I will not be saying which one, but it wasn't a good one. And as previously mentioned, by now I had moved into my new house with my roommate. But before he got arrested, he asked me where I was moving, and I told him which street corner the house was on. Very stupidly, I know. Well, my roommate's boyfriend at the time was affiliated as well. We were with some real winners at the time, right? And he was apparently notified that my house had been marked by the gang my ex belonged to, and that, in the end, proved true. One morning at around 6, my roommate and her boyfriend were sitting in the driveway in her car with the lights off. I was inside the house asleep, and a car then pulled up in front of my house, blocking the driveway, preventing my roommate from pulling her car out. We're still unsure whether or not these people initially knew that there were people sitting in my roommate's car or not. The mystery car, though, sat blocking the driveway for a few minutes before a man got out of the passenger seat and began walking directly up the driveway to my porch. Luckily, my roommate's boyfriend had a gun on him, and once he saw the man walking towards the front door, he got out of my roommate's car and flashed his gun at the man. The man saw it and ran back to the car, which then sped off. Maybe a few weeks later, I had driven to the gas station a few streets over after the sun had gone down. I was getting a vape or something when I was walking back to my car out of the gas station, and a man in the same car that was in front of my house pulled up next to me and started yelling something. I couldn't tell what he was saying before I just yelled back, "Shut up and leave me alone," thinking at the time that I was just randomly being catcalled. I got in my car and went to pull out of the gas station, noticing his car was sitting in front of the exit that I was going to take and he wasn't moving. So I went out of a different exit and turned back onto the street that my house was on. I looked behind me and saw him following me. He waited for me to leave before he pulled out behind me and followed me. At this, I started going down different streets and he kept tailing. Eventually, I freaked out and I sped up real fast and made a quick impulsive turn that threw him off my track. But that day, I didn't go home. Another day, though, I came home from work and saw that the window in our dining room that looks out to the backyard, the only window on the first story that doesn't have iron bars guarding it from the inside, it had been tampered with from the outside. It had a screen secured to it so that the window may be opened, and the screen had been ripped off. We reattached it and tried to rip it off ourselves, and it was really hard to do that. My roommate's boyfriend was able to, but we definitely were not strong enough. It would have taken a lot of effort to get that screen off in the end. The last instance that took place, my roommate's boyfriend and his friend had left our house to go on a walk. When they came back, as they were walking back up to my house, they saw two men peeking through the other dining room window trying to see inside. They noticed my roommate's boyfriend as he started yelling at them, asking what the heck they were doing, and they just scurried away. Me and my ex's final hearing happened a few months ago, and I've gotten him locked up until 2036. I think that maybe his fellow gangbangers have realized that a man locked up for the next 12 years is not worth risking their freedom over anymore, and so I have since seemingly been left alone. So I'm pretty new here, but this experience pops up in my head every once in a while, and I wanted to share it and see if anybody else has experienced anything else, well, similar. I'm a total skeptic of all things strange, but to this day, this still gives me the chills. A couple of years ago, I was still living at home with my parents. Both of our bedrooms are upstairs. This particular night, my dad was working the night shift, so it was just my mum and I at the house. We hung out together that evening and then went our separate ways for the night. She went to her room and I went to mine. Now, my bed is positioned so that my head is as far away from the door as possible, and my feet are as close to the door as possible, so when I sleep, I'm literally facing the door. At around 2 a.m., I woke up lying flat on my back because I felt like someone was staring at me from my left side. I know that it was around 2 a.m. because after this happened, I checked the clock and this event couldn't have lasted longer than maybe a minute. I looked over, and clear as day, there was my mum standing there. I remember vividly that she had on a white nightgown with a little baby blue colored flowers on it that she wears all the time, even to this day, and was standing quiet as could be next to me. I laughed kind of startled and I audibly said, "What the heck? You scared the heck out of me. What do you want?" It's entirely important at this point to mention that my mum and I, we're best friends, so we always mess with each other a little bit. It isn't uncommon for us to have late-night hangout sessions, so in my sleepy state it was entirely plausible that she had come over to wake me up to go downstairs to get a snack with her or something. But after I said this, there wasn't a peep from her. Absolutely nothing from her. No movement even whatsoever. I said something like, "Come on, what the heck?" thinking that she was going to break and laugh, but nothing. At that point, I started to worry, thinking that something was wrong with her, like maybe she was sick or something terrible had happened to a family member and she wasn't sure how to say it. Again, I said, "Mum, what is it?" As I said that, I used my elbow, the elbow closest to her, to gain leverage to start pulling myself into a sitting position on the bed and began to twist to face her. One more time I said, "Mum," and as I said that, I reached out to sort of push or touch her on the shoulder to try and get some sort of reaction from her, but my entire body slumped forward over the bed when she just, all of a sudden, disappeared. Completely. Like, absolutely was not there. To say that I almost soiled myself really is an understatement. I got up fast, thinking that I completely lost it, or she did pull something on me. I threw the light on and darted across the hall into her room, where she was very peacefully asleep with her breathing machine. I woke her up to ask her about it and was met with a lot of confusion and mild annoyance that I disturbed her slumber. I didn't sleep the rest of the night that night, and it was hard to sleep for the next few nights too. So, has anyone else ever had anything like this happen to them? I've had many paranormal encounters, starting from my teenage years, intensifying in my early adulthood, and seemingly tapering off now that I'm in my late 30s. The first experience that I remember, it was in 9th grade, coming home from school. My parents were both working, so usually I'm home by myself until late dinner. I usually get the rice started in the rice cooker and thaw the meats. And this afternoon, I was extra tired from wrestling practice, so I was relieved when I came home and heard rustling in the kitchen, and the faucet turning on and off too. I didn't actually look in there to see who it was, but I assumed it was my mum because sometimes she'd get home early from her restaurant job. Sometimes they have like private events or whatever, and they'd send some waitstaff home. I turned the corner to the bedroom and yelled out to her, "Can you wake me up in like an hour? I wanted to study for a test tomorrow." I heard her say in a raspy voice, "Okay, Con." Con is a Vietnamese term addressing your own child. I thought nothing of it. Maybe she's a little bit sick or something. Anyway, I woke up from the landline phone ringing eventually. Cell phones in the early 2000s were available, but we were poor, so only the adults had them. And it was my mum asking me if I wanted the leftover food from the restaurant. I told her, "Did you go back to the restaurant for leftover food?" She said no. She's been working there the whole time. Chills ran down my back. It was twilight and the sun was setting, so the whole house had an eerie semi-darkness to it. I told my mum to hurry home, please. I didn't lock my bedroom door so I could see out into the dark hallway. I jumped up to go and lock the bedroom door and turned on the light, opened the window and turned on the radio, anything to drown out the silence and the dark. Eventually, my dad got home first, in fact, and I was so relieved to see him, but didn't know if I should tell him what had happened. I waited until dinner time to slip in casually that I thought Mum was home earlier and was doing something in the kitchen. She denied it, and they concluded that I must have imagined the whole thing, but I know that I didn't. Someone was in the house, rustling in the kitchen, turning faucets on and off, and imitated my mum in its raspy voice. It called me Con, so my first thought was that it understood Vietnamese too. No relatives that we knew were going to come over, nor did they have the keys to get into the house anyway. To this day, I still don't know what it was, or how it mimicked my mum's voice. It wasn't the only spooky thing that happened in that apartment, but it was the first and probably the spookiest at that time. Late April of 2022, me and a few friends went on a road trip through southern Illinois. We passed by Shawnee National Forest, and stopped at the Trig Observation Tower. After soaking in the beautiful view and smoking a few joints with a random stoner couple that we met on the way up, we parted ways with our smoke buddies and headed out toward our campsite for the night. It was getting late, and we were driving down these back roads as the sun was setting. It was pretty isolated too. Incredibly thick woods flanked both sides of the road, and not another car in sight. That's when we saw a light up ahead, just barely visible through some thick brush. We slowed down, thinking that it was some campers getting set up for the night or some hikers who got lost before sundown. As we approached, though, something seemed off. The light emanated from this old camper van, and the thing hadn't moved in months. Vines were slowly creeping over the canopy. The whole setup just screamed abandoned. We looked back to have a second look, trying to make out whether or not it was from a fire or something inside the van. At first glance, we didn't see anyone as we surveyed the area, but there he was, feet away from the camper, half hiding behind a tree. He was shirtless, only in his coverall pants and hiking boots. He was staring at us and didn't reply when we shouted a hello. As he began to walk in our direction with one hand hidden behind his back, as if he may be holding something, we called out again to see if he needed assistance or knew where the campsite was, but he just kept coming, silent and expressionless. We didn't wait to see what he was up to. We leaped right back into the car and flew out of there, dust and rocks kicking up as we took off down the road. But we were pretty shaken by the time that we finally pulled into our campsite. But worse was yet to come. We had also left the firewood at the gas station, and with the rain, everything around us was pretty wet. We ended up hanging up our hammocks and attempted to fall asleep without a fire, which wasn't great for our nerves either. But no sooner had we all sighed and started to relax than we heard footsteps coming up from over the crest of a hill, slow and deliberate, just like the guy that we had seen earlier. We killed our lights and sat there in the dark listening. It felt like eons before the steps stopped, and we finally worked up the courage to look around. We took our flashlights and knives just in case and did a quick scan, but we saw nothing. By then, though, we said to heck with this, so we started packing up our gear, figuring that we'd just sleep in the car in the end. But then, from behind us, there was a cough, and that was all we needed to pack up in a hurry and race down the cluttered trail to our car. We didn't even worry about packing neatly. We just tossed all of our stuff in the back, and we got the heck out of Dodge. The next hour was a blur of dark, twisty little roads with no cell service and not a hint of where we were going. Finally, though, we hit a paved road, and after about 20 more minutes and running on fumes, we come upon a little country store with a gas pump connected to an adorable house and auto garage. It had already closed for the night, but the family living there saw us at the pump while they were having dinner and came outside to help. They even opened the store so that we could buy some snacks and some pop in the end. After what we experienced, talking to them was really a huge relief and let us calm our nerves. We eventually got back up on the road and kept driving 6 hours straight, all the way back home.
For context, this was on my grandparents' property that had tons of negative things happen. Most of it is not my place to share or say, but what I will say is that my grandparents' parents used to own even more than my grandparents do now. One chunk of the property was sold behind my family's back, and another part of the property was a now common swim hole that we had to sell to the government for some reason I'm not aware of. But the rest of the property was split among my great-grandparents' 3 sons. One selling it behind the family's back, and the other turned it into a farm and dentist office. My grandfather's portion of the property has 2 of his sons' houses living there. One of my uncles had a bunch of stuff happen that, again, is not my place to say, and my other uncle's house used to belong to my great-grandmother. My great-grandmother died in that house, and later the house was remodeled to fit my uncle, his wife, and 2 children in it. There's no need to keep going on because a bunch of stuff happened over the different properties and hundreds of acres. But me and all my cousins had seen unexplainable things there. I've caught ghost photos, and my cousins have played with Ouija boards all over that property multiple times. I have had hundreds of stories from this place, but this one always throws me for a bit of a loop. So this happened around March time. My other great-grandmother had just died due to a heart attack on her way to the hospital, so my family had to come and stay a few days for her funeral. My grandparents used to have this vehicle that we call the Bowder. I was driving the Bowder that night and going down the different gravel roads through the grassy fields and forests to drop all my cousins off at their houses, since they had all come that day to visit. I was approaching the first cousin's house, only to slam the brakes when I saw something absolutely terrifying. The best way that I can describe the pure size and massive mass of this creature is to describe this dog that we used to have on the property, a Rottweiler. This Rottweiler was massive and could stand mid-chest to you on all fours. The mass of this creature was almost like as if you picked up that dog and held it in front of you to make it seem like it was standing on a grassy hill about 50 to 100 feet away. The creature was maybe about 3 to 4 times the size of that Rottweiler. Its fur was pure black and exactly the shape and build of the Rottweiler, but it had deep red eyes that you could hardly see in the dark, and it slowly walked across the grassy hill until it disappeared into the forest. I looked at my cousins, face white as paper. "Did you see that?" I asked. They looked at me confused and collectively said no. I took them home and was anxious the entire time on the lonely and dark drive back home to the main building. The next day, we had my great-grandmother's visitation, and after my family and cousins ate supper at my grandmother's house, me and my cousins decided to go to the same grassy field that night together to reflect on the recent death and just spend some quality time to wind down and relax a bit. My cousin was being stupid, turning off headlights to the Bowder for short periods of time, saying that she could see due to the bright moonlight that night. And that night was the night that we crashed into a ditch. The exact day after I saw the big black dog that I assume was probably some sort of a hellhound or something. Luckily, we managed to get the Bowder out of the ditch and drove the rest of the night in silence. Except for my cousins yelling at me for being no help to get the vehicle out of the ditch. To be honest though, I was crouched in the corner, sort of panicking. I thought that maybe we would see that thing again, and I just didn't want to be there, stuck and stranded like that. So, if anyone thinks that this is anything other than a hellhound, then I would love to hear your theories, because this is the best that I've been able to come up with all these years later. So this happened in the basement of my childhood home when I was around 13 to 14 years old. The house didn't feel particularly haunted or anything, but both of my 2 siblings can attest that weird stuff used to happen down in that basement. I was having a sleepover with a friend one day, and whenever we stayed at my house, we always slept down there. The basement was fully finished with a big TV, couch, pool table, Murphy bed, the works. So it was great because us rowdy teenagers could hang out down there and not disturb my parents as much. Anyway, we fell asleep watching a movie on a DVD or something, and at some point I recall waking up to the bright yellow selection screen glaring in the dark and the same annoying sound clip replaying over and over at just a few decibels too loud. Now, it's important to note that to the left of the TV was a tall, skinny closet with a door. I remember that we had gone into the closet to grab some extra blankets before starting the movie and all that, and perhaps we didn't close it all the way after because when I woke up, the door was slightly ajar, maybe 3 to 4 inches. So I wake up and I'm in that weird, surreal state where I can't really tell if I'm awake yet or still asleep and just dreaming, but I look at the TV and am suddenly frozen with fear. Right in front of the TV on the left-hand side was this tall, skinny black shadow obstructing the bright yellow color of the screen. It didn't have any particular features, more just a dark, vaguely shaped mist of a standing figure. Suddenly, though, almost as if the shadow noticed me looking at it, the mist quickly drifts into the closet next to the TV, and I swear that the door closes shut behind it. At this point, I'm so scared that I couldn't even move. I wanted to wake up my friend really badly, but I couldn't even bring myself to speak. I just sat there hoping that I was just seeing things and or trying to convince myself that I was still asleep and it was in fact just a dream. All of a sudden though, my friend, who I thought was asleep this entire time, sits straight up next to me on the couch and goes, "Hey, did you just see that?" We sprinted up those stairs so fast our feet barely touched the ground. Really, I don't think that I've ever run like that in my entire life, that scared. We told my parents the next morning and they just sort of laughed at us, clearly not believing it. And when I told my siblings the same story, they both just sort of shrugged, each responding similarly with someone along the lines of, "Yeah, well, weird stuff happens down in that basement all the time." When I was around 11 to 13 years old, I experienced something that, to this day, I really have no answers for. So I woke up for school one morning and walked across the passageway to the bathroom. I stood in front of the sink in the mirror to brush my teeth, and as I looked into the mirror, I just suddenly blacked out. Not in the physical sense, but my body was frozen as if in fear, and I saw a scene that went like this. I was seeing a POV of myself floating in space, surrounded by stars and dark space. Directly in front of me, but quite far away, I saw a house floating in space. It was a stereotypical house, I guess. A red wooden door right in the middle with a window on each side, green bushes at the front, and I was floating closer to the house, almost like zooming in on it. I got closer and closer, and when I got right up to the door, it opened, and I saw this face of a woman with black hair. She was old, and her face made me feel with fear, like I have never felt before. As soon as I saw her face, she screamed, and I woke up. I was looking at myself in the bathroom mirror again. I was still frozen in fear, similar to the feeling of waking up from a nightmare and not being able to move or scream. But maybe that's not a universal experience, it's just the best way that I can say it. Anyway, I think it must have lasted a few seconds, maybe a minute, but man, it felt like forever. It took me a moment to compose myself and try to get ready for school. The following morning, when I woke up, it happened again. This carried on for a few weeks, if memory serves me correctly. It became intermittent, with days in between that were normal. Every time, though, it was the same thing. Space, the house, the door, the screaming old woman. People I've told this story to have always asked me what she looked like, if I knew her, but I didn't. Her face was hard to describe as well. The best comparison I can make is to the uncanny, almost like an AI-generated face that was randomized and just looks kind of off, I guess. Something almost human that should be human, but was something about it that just isn't. That feeling took over my whole body too. The fear was almost unbearable. It was almost like losing consciousness, having a vision, and I don't exactly know. I mean, my body didn't fall to the floor, I just sort of froze and my eyes stayed open, but what I saw around me was not my bathroom. I told my parents about it, and they didn't know what to think, and I doubt that I could describe it as well as I can now. They told me to wait to see if it happens again. They chalked it up to something like being half asleep and still daydreaming. For a few days it didn't happen as well, and I thought that it had finally stopped. Then, One Sunday afternoon, I was in the living room with my dad. He was watching a soccer game. I was at the desk area behind the couch packing some things away, and it happened again, the same as it always did. The fear, the freezing, the space, the house, and the woman. When I came around, I just cried. I went over to my dad, who noticed something was wrong. I told him that it happened again, and it was now happening during the day while I was very awake and around my family. AKA, I should feel safe, which in my mind rules out anything about me being in a sleep-wake state or still dreaming. They eventually took me to a doctor who listened to my story and also didn't really have any answers. He told me to wait it out, and after seeing my doctor, it didn't really happen for a long time. I thought that really explaining it to someone must have released whatever hold it had on me. But about a year or two later, we relocated overseas for my dad's job. I was 14, and the last time it happened was the first morning moving into our new house. Since that day, it hasn't happened again. I'm now 27, and I still have no answers as to what the heck this was. So, if anyone here has any answers for me, or has had a similar experience, or maybe can refer me to a space community where I can find answers about this, then please do let me know. I want to preface this by saying that while I don't live in the safest neighborhood, I've lived here all my life without feeling unsafe. Neighborhoods like mine, which are impoverished and predominantly minority, are often labeled as dangerous, but they foster a strong sense of community among residents. And one night, I was walking home after leaving my apartment to buy something at a nearby store. I live in a city that really never sleeps, and it was only around 10 or 11 p.m., so it was just a regular early night for me to the deli to get some snacks. There was nothing eerie or weird or dangerous about it. As I entered my apartment building, a man hurried to catch the door before it closed behind me, though. It's common for people, including myself, to forget their keys or need to use the intercom to enter, so I held the door for him despite not recognizing him and sensing that he was intoxicated. My building had two sides, and I assumed that he lived on the other side since he wasn't a familiar face or anything. Like I said, I've lived here most of my life and I know most of my neighbors. Anyway, as I walked into the lobby, there was another boy waiting for the elevator. Thinking back, I don't believe that I recognized him either. When the elevator arrived, the boy and I walked in, and at the last minute, the man grabbed the door to join us as it was closing. It was then that I noticed that the man had been lingering off to the side of the lobby, waiting for the elevator too. I began to feel uneasy. The man had entered at the last moment. He was able to see the elevator floor button that I pressed. His finger hovered over the button of the floor that I had just pressed as if he was also going to press that one, until he noticed that it was already pressed. I immediately felt my stomach drop as I definitely knew that he was not someone who lived on my floor. Thankfully, the other boy in the elevator was going to a floor higher than mine. When we reached my floor, the man exited the elevator and held the door open, expecting me to exit after him. I hesitated, slightly staring at him without moving. Something inside of me urged me to stay in the elevator. Once he realized that I wasn't getting out, he let the door shut, and I immediately heard his footsteps going straight down the stairs to exit the building. I stared at the boy, wondering if I should say something, worried that he would think that I was weird for just staying on the elevator, even though we passed my floor. But in the end, I didn't say anything. We reached his floor, and he silently got off, and I took the elevator back down to my floor. I went into my apartment, and I locked all my doors. What scares me most about this, though, is that my parents were out of the country, so if that creepy man would have forced his way into my apartment, I definitely would have been completely alone. I don't know if he was really after me or if I had made the whole thing up in my head, but I have never had a feeling of intuition or uneasiness like that before. Looking back, I honestly wonder if that boy was a guardian angel. This story needs a lot of context and by any means is not meant to scare or to shock, and I'm not trying to gain anything from this. I am genuinely scared and I could really use some advice. I don't know if anyone will share this, but if you find something familiar or recognize any of the entities, then please let me know. So the story starts when I was about 7 years old. I'm now 25. My dad was a taxi driver and, let's say, allegedly a loan shark. We were living with my grandparents and my dad was fed up with my mum and my grandpa always getting into arguments and decided that we needed to leave. The prices for apartments and houses in Eastern Europe at that time were unaffordable for their income. My dad a cab driver and my mum unemployed at the time, but somehow because of my dad's alleged loan business, he managed to get his hands on an apartment. And that's pretty crucial to my story. That apartment was on a communist block, apartment 1, on a building numbered 6. I won't disclose the name of the road for now, but the whole thing was sketchy, even from my point of view at that time. Apparently, I found out years later that the apartment was lost by a gambler, and because of the circumstances he was in, he had to sell it to pay debt to an alleged loan shark. You understand how that goes, but when we moved there, a series of strange things started happening. And something even today gets my mind running back there, and I just feel like there's something that wants me to go back there or around that place. So a week after we moved into that apartment, everything was normal. I was as happy as a kid may have been, and I had my own room as opposed to sleeping with my dad. It was a sunny Saturday around springtime and my mum was in the kitchen and I was playing in the living room just watching some TV. All of a sudden though, I start hearing a woman crying her heart out and sobbing from the outside. I looked out the window but I didn't see anybody. My mum came running into the room with a shocked face and asked if I was alright. I told her yes and asked who's crying this loud. And when we looked out the window again, as we were on the ground floor, we looked down and there was a woman standing below our window, caressing the wall and crying as loud as she could. My mum then shouted at her, "Lady, are you okay? What's happening?" But she didn't respond initially. After a while, my mum was considering calling the police, but when she asked her again if she was okay, she raised her head from the ground and told my mum, as she stopped crying, "You cannot understand. Nobody does. You will soon enough." Scared, my mum shut the window and went back inside and called my dad who was at work, but after she told him what happened, the woman had gone away. Strangely, as we were on the ground floor, we had a pretty big line of sight outside, but we didn't see her get up or leave or anything. Anyway, she popped up a couple of times after that, and we just concluded that she was crazy, and my mum actually filed a police report at one stage. We thought that she might be somebody related to the gambler that lost the house or something, and maybe she's mad at us moving in there, but upon my dad asking, the gambler had no relatives or close friends for that matter. Well, she showed up about 6 times, with one-day pauses in between since the first appearance. The last time she showed up to cry under our window, my mum was mad and went outside to argue with her. She wore a grey hoodie and had the hood on and a strange selection of clothes for a lady on the elder side, around maybe 50 to 60 years old. My mum told her to leave and to stop coming to cry here or she'll be in trouble with the police. She just looked blank at my mum and got up and left. That was really the only time that we ever saw her getting up to leave, by the way. And after that, she stopped coming around and we never saw her again. The thing that was a mystery, though, at that time is that we spoke with some neighbors and nobody had heard of her. A couple who were living above us had their living room window above us and they told us that they kind of saw somebody fitting our description but never heard her crying. Mind you, it was way too loud to not reach their window as they were on the first floor and the woman crying was as loud as she could. she never showed up again, and a police officer came after 2 weeks and told us that they have been patrolling around and found nobody fitting the description, or other reports of crazy ladies crying under people's windows. So, really, it was as if we were the only ones seeing her. Anyway, this next one, I call this thing the fast entity because I have no idea what it is or how it looked, apart from what I was able to identify at that time. Now, whenever I was just hanging around playing or trying to sleep around the house and all that, sometimes when I was looking into the direction of the window, there was something that would move either up or sideways really, really fast. I could see that it was black, but it was so fast that I could only catch it in the corner of my eye every single time, like a big bird flying really close to the window at incredible speed. Honestly, I thought it was just my imagination, until I had a friend from school come over. I was excited that day to show him some new toys, and he all of a sudden just stopped and asked, "Wow, did you see how fast that went by the window?" And I remember how he was like, "Wow, that must have been a cool bird or something," as he wasn't really the smartest tool in the shed, but he was funny. I had an eerie feeling on the other hand. It didn't look like a cool fast bird to me, but rather like something trying to get a glimpse of what I was doing on the constant. The best that I can describe it is like 3 or 4 basketballs merged together with a cape over them, moving at Formula 1 speeds past my window every now and then. I actually told my mum and dad about this, but they are really skeptical, and at that age they probably thought that it was only my imagination. One early morning, as my dad used to start his shift at around 5 o'clock, he went to start his car, and it was really cold that morning. He had an old diesel beat-up Fiat. He usually let the engine run for a couple of minutes before driving away. As he was sitting by his car sipping his coffee, he saw an elderly woman kneeling and leaving something at every door. The entrance of the apartment building had a big see-through door. She was wearing a black dress and had a scarf over her head, and as he turned away to open the car door, she just completely vanished. Luckily, though, another neighbor just got out of the building at that time. My dad started chatting with him and asked him if he saw this woman inside, and he told my dad, "Oh, it must have been the cleaning lady. She usually mops the building, but she comes at around 9 or 10. It's a bit early for her to be here right now." My dad went briefly into the entrance hall of the building, and all he could find was dust thrown at every doorstep. Strange, as it was snowing outside and the ground was soaked in snow and mud. He just left for work in the end, and really he tried to forget it. Now, my mum just got a job at this point, and at this time for me to spend some time alone, I would get home from school and I would just be, well, alone. But I had a cousin older than me, and she usually came as I finished school to stay with me until my mum got home from work. I was in the 1st grade and she was in the 9th grade at that time. I finished school at around 12 and she usually finished her class at around 1 o'clock, so there was almost an hour that I had to spend alone at home every day. My mum always finished at around 5. Now, she had a boyfriend which I really adored at the time. He was a really cool guy I looked up to, and he was into dirt bikes, bikes in general, and all the cool stuff that a 1st grader might find really interesting. My cousin usually came together with him, and they'll play with me until my mum would get home. He was always really dressed nicely and bringing all sorts of cool magazines and playing cards, probably to impress my cousin, but the thing is that I really liked him. Now one day I got home from school and was patiently waiting for my cousin to arrive. I suddenly hear a knock on the door and I thought, wow, it's pretty early for my cousin to finish school. I went to the door and looked through the door visor and saw my cousin's boyfriend standing there with a straight posture, waiting, also looking strangely pale. In excitement, I went to get the keys to open the door to let him in. As I went to get the keys, though, I saw my cousin out of the window coming into the entrance of the apartment building. Our apartment was really close to the entrance, as it was the first one. She got home early from school that day and she came straight to me. When I opened the door, my cousin was there, and I let her in, and at a glance I saw her boyfriend in the hallway in the same straight position, looking pale and waiting outside. As she closed the door, I asked her, "Isn't your boyfriend coming in?" She replied, looking confused, "He isn't coming today. He has a lot of homework to do." And I thought, okay, he only walked her here, and then he must have gone away. But he was there before her, which was really strange. What would have happened, too, if she didn't finish school early that day? Would I have let whoever that was, or whatever that was, inside, thinking that it was my cousin's cool boyfriend? Because after some discussion with her, I confirmed that he was never there that day. But even now I know what I saw, and he was. Or at least something was. There have been a series of other strange things that have happened there too. We only lived there for like a year and a half, but there have been countless strange instances that will take a lot of detail to explain. But maybe I'll make a part 2 at some stage and I'll share with you guys. Like, from perfectly working water pipes bursting to random scratching sounds, there was a lot of them too. We all had restless feelings just being in that apartment. My father used to work like 14 to 16 hours a day to be able to provide for us, as my mum didn't earn a whole lot. But he would arrive home tired and feeling like he was going to fall asleep behind the wheel. And once he came home and he just couldn't get any rest, even feeling that tired, because he felt like something was off. My parents eventually sold the apartment because they raised some more money and got a good offer on another bigger apartment, 10 k's away from the city. Now, why am I reminiscing about all of this, and why am I concerned and sharing all of this? Well, I had a nightmare the past few days that seems to be repeating, where I wake up on my desk that I used to have in that apartment, and when I look around, I'm in a cemetery with a computer in front of me. Strange, I know, but the feeling that I constantly have is that I have to go there. I have to see something. I don't know what. Not in the apartment, because I don't know who lives there now, and honestly, I don't want to be a crazy person knocking on their door like, "Hello, I used to live here," and all that. But the thing is that the town that we live in is relatively small, and I have friends all over and used to drive part-time for my dad's new business for a while when I used to be in college. I always get close to that street, but even though it's convenient to drive on that road to get to another part of the city, I, for some reason, just never do. There's always something keeping me from going there. Not that I don't want to, but there's always something just keeping me from it. Like a car parked the wrong way, somebody backing up looking for parking and blocking the street and all that, and I would always have to go around them. I've never had friends living on that road, never really had a reason to go there after we left, even though it's kind of a popular area of the city where you can go if you just drive around. I had a work colleague who lived pretty close but a couple of buildings away from that road. We had a little house party at his place, and he asked who wants to come with him to the store to get something, and I volunteered, and as soon as I got up, I had a sort of striking headache, which I thought was because of the alcohol, and I decided that I was too drunk to go in the end. But later on, I realized that if I would have went, we would have gone on the road that I used to live on to get to the store. So is something stopping me from going back there? I have this feeling that I should go by that place, but I just find it hard to explain to others. A sort of feeling that in order to fix what I'm feeling and the answers to some of my problems that I'm experiencing are there, and I should just go on a walk around that building on that road. My question is, though, am I being deceived? Could something want me to go there that isn't good or good-intentioned? Or is it the opposite, and I have to solve this now that I can? And if I decide to go to those measures, can I protect myself should any of this be real and try to hurt me? I am pretty skeptical when it comes to these things, but the feeling is so strong that I'm starting to question my sanity. I don't know. Maybe it's better to be safe than sorry. If anybody hears this and wants more details or specifics, I would be happy to share more in the second part that I might write up at some stage. In any case, I appreciate you hearing me out and any advice that you may be able to give. So my best friend Jordan, female and same age as me, and I were FaceTiming on a casual summer afternoon. We often would do our own thing while on call, just for company's sake. For illustration, I mean that she had a vanity in her bedroom where she would keep her iPad propped up that gave a view of the chair that she sat on when using the vanity, and the blank wall that it faced. On the other side of the vanity was a wall that was shared with her closet. She was organizing her clothes, and I was just minding my own business, playing with my dog while my iPad sat propped up on the kitchen table. Occasionally, I would glance over at the iPad, but it was always in my peripheral view, basically. Now, at some point, I noticed the chair was no longer kissing the vanity, but was pulled back an inch or two. Didn't think anything of it, so I continued minding my own business. A couple of minutes passed, and I looked over and saw that it was noticeably further away from the vanity, about a foot away now. I thought, that's strange, but maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. Another minute passed, and when I looked back over, the chair was a solid few feet from the vanity now, and at this point, I knew something weird was going on. Was she playing tricks on me? Was I not noticing her coming into the camera view? I thought that I would have noticed in my peripheral vision. I could also see her moving things in the closet the whole time, but I don't know, maybe I was wrong. At this point, I said something along the lines of, Jordan, why has your chair moved so much? She then walks out of the closet to where I can see her and looks visibly distressed. She's never been the type to play pranks or lie or anything. We are best friends to this day, and she is virtually incapable of lying. So, I believe that she didn't do it. For context, I could see the entire chair at this point, the floor around it, and everything as well, so I could see that nobody was moving the chair. She was also home alone at this stage. Then, all of a sudden, the chair literally flies backwards into the wall. We both screamed bloody murder. I have never had such a visceral reaction to something in my life, in fact. We didn't know what to do or say for a minute. We just sat in deafening silence. She moved the chair back to its proper place, and we decided to carry on and try to ignore what had just happened, probably out of fear to acknowledge it. She then tells me that she needs to grab some trash bags from downstairs and that she'd be right back. Now, this is where things get pretty intense and pretty unbelievable, I know that. It's so out of this world, in fact, that I truly cannot comprehend to this day how or what actually happened, but I went back to playing with my dog when I got a sudden urge to look at the camera, and I swear that a rope, think noose-like, drops and hangs from what I assume is the ceiling, but I couldn't see it as it was out of camera view. I instantly hang up the call and start bawling my eyes out. Honestly, it felt demonic. I got a call back from her a few minutes later, still in tears. She looked concerned and asked what had happened. I said to her, "Do you own a rope?" And she said no. I said, "Did you drop a rope in front of the camera?" And she said no. I then explained what happened, and she didn't believe me at first. But the measure of my distress indicated to her that I was definitely telling the truth. Now, I admit that she very well could have been the culprit, but this was 11 years ago, and she would not be capable of holding onto a lie for this long, I think. But we still talk about that day a lot, in fact. I know how insane this sounds. I know this feels like a scene from The Conjuring and couldn't possibly be real, but I swear to you, on my dead brother's grave, that this event is real. I struggle to tell people about it because I know just how insane I sound when I say it. I've had many other paranormal interactions, but nothing ever like this. So, if you have any thoughts as to what this could have been, Other than maybe she was a mastermind prankster, then I would love to hear it. I know for a fact that the chair wasn't her because, I could see with clear visibility that it wasn't. That much is clear to me. I need to share this before I convince myself that it didn't happen. This happened in December last year. I was visiting my uncle in northern Minnesota, near the Canadian border. He's the kind of guy who prefers solitude, lives in a cabin deep in the woods, no close neighbors, just the trees and whatever lives in them. I never minded visiting. I like the quiet, in fact. But after that night, I don't think that I'll ever be going back. It was the coldest night of the year that night, at least negative 30 degrees. My uncle had gone into town for supplies, so I was alone. The cabin was warm though, the fire crackling, and I was scrolling on my phone when I heard it. Something moving outside. Not footsteps, more like a dragging sound, slow and deliberate. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then came the knock. Not at the door, at the window. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I froze. My uncle's nearest neighbor was miles away, and no sane person would ever be out in that cold. But the knocking came again. I reached for my flashlight and shined it through the window. And man, I wish that I hadn't. There was something standing just beyond the tree line. It was tall, at least 7 or 8 feet, but completely emaciated, with long bony limbs. Its skin looked frostbitten, almost blackened in fact, and its eyes were glowing, not reflecting light, glowing on their own, like embers buried in a dying fire. I should have looked away. I should have closed the curtains, but I was frozen, staring, unable to breathe. And then it smiled. Its teeth were too many, too sharp, stretching across its face. It opened its mouth wider than any human should, and then it said something that I perceived to be "let me in." The voice didn't match the body. It sounded wrong, like a recording playing at the wrong speed, too deep and too garbled. I instantly ran. I grabbed my uncle's rifle, locked the door, and I backed into the farthest corner of the room. The knocking eventually stopped, but I could hear something scraping against the walls outside, slow and patient, like it had all the time in the world. I sat there for what felt like hours, rifle shaking in my hands, until my uncle finally came back. The second that his headlight swept across those trees, the noises instantly stopped. He found me pale, sweating and gripping the gun like my life depended on it. I told him everything. He didn't say a word, just nodded and checked around the cabin. And when he came back, he looked unsettled. "There are no tracks in the snow," he said. "Nothing." That was impossible, though. I heard it, I saw it, but there was nothing outside, no footprints, no marks on the walls, just the untouched snow and the silent watching trees. I left the next morning, and I haven't been back since. My uncle, bless his soul, still lives there, but he told me something before I left. He said, "If you ever hear it again, don't look, and whatever you do, never let it in." I have never told anybody else about this until now, but I know what I saw, and I know that whatever it was, it's definitely still out there somewhere. This happened about 4 years ago. I was dating a man who was an extreme skeptic when I've always been a 100% believer, even with only one personal paranormal experience before, which is a cool story, but for another time. He and I had been dating for about 3 years at this point, and I've always had a rule about no pranking, scaring, or tricking my partner, and I've always been completely honest with him, and he had the same values with me. Despite him being a non-believer, to this day he has always said that what he experienced in this story was completely unfabricated, and to his dissatisfaction, he still has no explanation for this event, even though he had mulled over it far too many times in all these past years. And this, even after he had ended things between us. He still maintains his skeptic status, but if you ask him to logically explain this incident without paranormal activity of some kind involved, all he says is, "I don't know." So, let me tell you what actually happened. Also, if anyone has had a similar experience or can offer any insight into this, I would love to hear it. So, one afternoon I was getting ready to go out on a date with said boyfriend. I like to do heavy makeup looks for fun when I go out, so per usual I was standing at my mirror on the dresser, creating some eyeshadow look, which notoriously took a bit of time. My boyfriend decided to go outside while I did this. He wanted to clean up the back porch a bit. So about 15 minutes into me doing my makeup while listening to some songs played Outlook on my Google Home, but not singing out loud because I didn't want to mess up my makeup, my boyfriend comes barreling in the front door and rushes to where I'm at in my room. He is completely out of breath, looking at me expectantly with tears in his eyes, as if I'm supposed to know what it is that had him in this state. Which, for context, he was the least emotional person that I'd ever dated. I had only seen him cry about 5 times in our whole 4-year relationship. So, obviously, I'm really confused. As if to try and make any sense to me, he yells, "What's wrong?" Still looking frantic and out of breath, I, of course, just say, "What?" And he repeats himself again, just looking at me. I asked him what had him acting so uncharacteristically freaked out, but he's acting like I should obviously know. Confusion between us continues until I finally get him to explain what he's trying to ask me. His version of the events in those few moments when he went outside was this. He says that he went to the yard and was moving fallen limbs and things into a pile as I get ready inside. A couple of minutes go by until he's interrupted by me, apparently standing at our sliding glass door that overlooks that part of the yard that he's in. He said that I looked extremely distressed though, could see my face very clearly, and that I looked scared. He then heard me bang on the door to get his attention, as if something was urgent, and then heard my voice yell from inside, "Get in the house, I need you now, come here now." Obviously, he doesn't hesitate, figuring that something was very wrong, or that I might be in danger somehow, which is when I see him coming inside. Honestly, I thought that he was pranking me at first because, I haven't moved from where I was at, and the curtain on the sliding glass door was covered still, but like I mentioned before, it was not in our nature to joke like that. He thinks the same thing of me when I said that I've been standing in front of my dresser the entire time. I had him repeat these events, and he did so sounding just as freaked out as he initially did. He said that he saw, very clearly, me, full body, and distinctly heard my voice, which he said he could never mistake my voice for anybody else, like a neighbor. He said that he watched my mouth yell these words to him, and I looked like I was the one who was really freaked out. There was nothing there when he looked for me in the living room next to the said door, and found me in my room holding up a makeup palette on one hand and the brush in the other. I wasn't even singing along to the music that I had playing, so it's not like he heard my singing and mistook it for whatever just happened. Nothing like that had ever happened between us since then, too. Fast forward a few years to my next boyfriend, though. I still lived in the same house and had told him this story when we were first getting to know each other, as I've always thought that it was interesting. He was a mild believer in paranormal activity, but didn't have any stories of his own. A few months until us dating after, he started coming into my house often, and he had his own experience too. You see, he went out to his car at night and had sat down in it. He'd been out there for a few moments while I was inside watching TV in bed. He comes in a couple of minutes later looking confused and asks me if I had stepped outside or had called for him, which obviously I didn't. Then he tells me that it's weird that I didn't because he distinctly heard my voice, almost in his ear while he was in the car smoking. He said that he heard me say as clear as anything, "What is that?" in an upset tone. When he turned around expecting to see me, there was nothing. He thought about what had just happened for a few seconds before getting out of the car and coming directly inside to see if it somehow was really me. And I can confirm that it definitely wasn't. I've never had any personal experience like this, or any paranormal experience in that house at all. I no longer live there, however, but I thought that this was worth sharing as it's always just bothered me a bit, and sits in the back of my mind a fair bit. So, does anyone else have any kind of experience with this sort of stuff themselves? And if you have, what was it and what did you do about it? A few weeks ago, my partner and I decided to go for a late drive to this really pretty walking trail on a mountain about 2 hours away from my house. I've only been there a handful of times, but it's somewhere my partner and his family would visit often. We left home at midnight, which is a lot later than we normally would, so it was like 2:30 in the morning when we actually got to the trail. I had a weird feeling as soon as I got out of the car though, but I get that every time I'm in a bushy area, so I brushed it off. This walking trail, it twists you through the bush on a dirt path, down a bunch of stairs to a cave with glowworms, and over a waterfall that eventually loops back around at the end. I stopped at a sign just before you walk into the bush to light a J, and I heard what sounded like somebody walking in the bush off the trail. Again, I just brushed it off as being a big lizard or something. However, that eerie feeling was more intense now for sure. Every few steps down the trail, I was turning around to look behind me. It sounded like somebody was walking behind us in boots. Anyway, we get to a point in the trail where you can start to see the waterfall, and you have to start walking down the stairs. They also kind of bend a little bit as you go around the corner. My partner stops in front of me, and as I'm turning around to check behind me, I hear a female voice say "stop," clear as day in my ear. It was not really a threatening voice, but it sent a cold shiver through my whole body, and I immediately knew that something did not want us there. Before I could say anything, my partner turns around and says, "We should leave." I agree, and we basically run out of this trail, both of us now checking behind us. As we exited the trail, still running, my partner turns to check behind us one more time and stumbles into me, nearly tripping both of us over in the process. We have never pulled out of there so quick, and when we finally felt safe further down the mountain, I told my partner what I had heard and asked him if he had heard it too, and that's why he wanted to leave. He said that he didn't hear the voice, but he could tell from the sound of the waterfall that the river below it was really high up and it was probably blocking our path. He did say though that as he was leaving he heard some weird clicking noises and that's why he fell into me. I also heard those noises, but at that point I didn't want to look behind me and I just wanted to get the heck out of there. After talking to my partner more about it, he told me that a few people have died in that river from jumping off the waterfall, and oddly enough, when I heard the first noise, I was reading a sign warning people not to jump from the waterfall to the river, and that there was a fine if you were caught swimming in the river as well. And so, yeah, that's my story, and it was a really weird experience, and we haven't been back to that mountain since then. This first strange event happened when I was alone in our computer room, playing some old first-person shooter with my buddies, when I got a whole body chill and noticed my hair stand up on my arms and legs. It didn't really bother me too much until the laundry basket that was on the floor next to me just sort of tipped over by itself. Weird. Then I look at my right arm, which was on the same side of the laundry basket, and I noticed 3 scratch marks on my right arm. Not bloody, but very apparent. Those 3 scratch-like marks freaked me out. They almost looked like when you press down on sunburnt skin, but did not immediately disappear, and I didn't touch my arm at all. I remember telling my parents about it, as I was absolutely terrified. My mum believed me, but my dad was pretty skeptical. Fast forward about 5 hours into the night, though, and my dad and mother are both woken up by the sound of our coffee machine cover getting flipped up and down repeatedly, which then ended up getting louder as it sounded like it had moved to the bottom of the stairs. My dad went downstairs to see what the commotion was about, but absolutely nothing seemed out of place. Our cat at the time was in their bed, as was our dog, so that wouldn't have made sense. This portion is from my parents' account, which to this day they still confirm what they experienced to be true. But I remember my dad telling me about this the next morning, and he seemed, well, scared, which I found odd as he was not religious or spiritual in any sense. Fast forward to literally the very next night, though, and my mother and father are woken up by me in their room sleepwalking, which I have absolutely zero record of ever doing before these events, and afterwards too. My parents described my actions as though I were possessed by a woman, as I was clearly asleep but was trying to talk to them, but they couldn't understand me. They said that I was moving like a woman, flaunting hips, walking very feminine-like. Being smart, my parents did not interfere, but just sort of observed until I went back to my bed and proceeded to tell my parents to get my gun and to get away from me because something was wrong. This basically ended in my mother having the house cleansed multiple times, and nothing strange really ever happened again after this cleansing. We do live in an old farmhouse on a Native American burial area for context, so that might have something to do with it, but really, I just don't know enough about this stuff to say anything about it. This happened almost a year ago, on November. I used to live alone in my house, which itself is in an area where not many people live. Back then, I was pretty bored as I hadn't been talking to my friends that much and wanted to do something exciting. That's when I saw the opportunity. I used to be fascinated by the concept of Ouija boards. I wasn't a believer, but I still wanted to try and see what happens. I decided to do it at around 2 a.m. and I needed a Ouija board obviously, so I made one after searching for designs from the internet in the evening. It was made out of cardboard, and afterwards at night, I set up the board to get started. Initially, I was actually scared because it's really quiet here, especially at night. You can only ever really hear insects from outside, and that's pretty rare as well. But I lit up a candle, I don't know why, but I thought that it would be cool to do this, and closed all the curtains. It was just that one flame from the candle lighting up the whole room filled with silence. I moved the planchette and asked some questions. Took inspiration from some experiences I read online, like, is someone here? Waited for a minute, and then asked 4 to 5 more similar questions to get more clearance, but it just wasn't moving. While this was all happening, I will admit that I was pretty scared because of the kind of atmosphere that the room had. But now comes the weird part. So, I was doing this sitting on the floor and facing a door, when I suddenly heard that door's metal L drop being banged once and a shadow kind of thingy from the light underneath the door, as if there was somebody else that moved across the door suddenly. I instantly jumped because it terrified me. My first instinct was to stop whatever I was doing. I blew the candle, and this was a huge mistake. The whole room suddenly went dark, and I forgot where my phone was. I got up to turn the lights on as soon as I could, and then something happened again. I'm not sure of this like 100%, but I heard something like footsteps in the room. My own footsteps weren't loud enough to be heard because I was wearing socks, but it sounded to me as if somebody ran in my direction, even for just a second. And as soon as I turned the lights on, I found my phone and I got out of that room and I instantly went to my bedroom. I couldn't sleep after all of that happened, so I scrolled on my phone to try and calm myself down a bit, and then eventually I fell asleep. The next morning, the first thing that I did was I threw that board in the trash. 2 nights later, I woke up in the middle of the night and found myself standing in the outside corridor. Maybe I was half asleep and I walked outside by myself, but as soon as I realized this, I instantly went back in. After that too, every time that I would sleep, I would get this feeling as if something was watching me, and this happened for almost a week. I tend to get a bit teary-eyed when I think about this. It always happens when I talk about paranormal stuff now. But do you guys think that this all could have been because of the Ouija board, regardless of whatever it was made out of? Or do you think that this is something else? So a few months ago, I was home alone on my deck outside using my telescope when I heard a car door open and shut, followed by my dog barking and then my front door opening. I figured, oh, my mum is just stopping home. Sure enough, within 3 seconds, my name is being called and yelled repeatedly from inside, along with "Are you home?" or "Where are you?" which, in hindsight, is a bit strange because my mum knew that I was home. The dog is still barking by now, and I can hear my mum walking down the hallway, so I'm thinking, well, she'll just see me on the deck and stop yelling. She doesn't have to worry about it, and I don't have to go, so it's fine. But I never saw my mum, and I just heard her. It was around 25 seconds later of this yelling, moving about the house, and I'm getting a bit worried because I had told my mum before she left that I would be outside. Stupid me opens the back door to go inside, and the house is suddenly completely silent. No dog, no mum, and all the doors are locked. If this was a one-time thing, I would have attributed it to me being tired or stressed, but no. For the past few years, I've been very aware that something tends to be around me. Like, I'll have experiences all the time, except they're never really scary like this one. Before, I could coexist with it, like, whatever, you're cool, dude, I'm not bothered by you, but this time it just felt really, really different. I still tried to pay it no mind because I live in Appalachia, and if you've heard something, then no you didn't. But it still kind of freaked me out. Could this have been something different from whatever I was so used to coexisting with before? Like a different spirit thing, if it was that? Or was it the same thing, and now I'm just realizing how ominous all of this really is? So my girlfriend and her friends, they invited me to stay at a small cabin, Airbnb, in the Appalachian Mountains near Seven Devils. The idea was to just go up there to enjoy some snow tubing, and then do some light drinking, hot tub and board games in the cabin afterwards. The cabin was pretty high up in the mountains, and the drive up to it was honestly kind of scary. Single car length road for the most part, no railings on either side of the road, so if you were on the side of the truck, which we'd rented a four-wheel drive to make the drive up, thank goodness, it was a sheer drop on that side. Sure, if we drove off the road, we'd likely be stopped by some trees on the way down, but still, it's a bit nerve-wracking for sure. Another thing was some of the trees on the trail had faces on them for decoration. I think that they were supposed to look cute, but they just kind of looked unnerving for most of us. I really should have taken pictures, but I was too anxious during the climb, so I never did. The cabin itself, though, was almost at the top of the mountain, and fairly small. A small living room with a very tiny and narrow kitchen and 2 bedrooms. hot tub on the lower porch because the cabin itself was basically on the second floor, so you had to go up to a stairway to get into it. Key to the cabin was in a lockbox, so no special door lock option, just an old-fashioned cabin. We came back after snow tubing and dinner. The others drank enough to get buzzed, whilst I only had a glass of wine since I have a condition that makes it dangerous to get too much alcohol in my system, so relatively sober. I enjoyed the hot tub as planned, witnessed a beautiful shooting star, then played board games after that until around 1 in the morning, when we all went to bed. Now, I woke up a little after 4 a.m. because I was suddenly sweating and then I kind of felt a bit unsettled. I decided I needed to go to the bathroom, so I got up. I left the bedroom and nothing seemed amiss. I used the bathroom, and when I left the bathroom, the front door was now wide open. Naturally, I felt immediately uneasy, but again, this was a small cabin, so really there was nowhere for any intruder to hide. I could easily see the entire interior of the cabin from the tiny hallway. I decided maybe the last person through the door last night after the hot tub just didn't fully close the door and lock it appropriately, because there was no sign by the door that says close door firmly or anything, and it was fairly windy outside. I mean, the wind was howling out there enough that you could hear it. So I go over to the door and I close it, making sure that it's firmly enough in the doorway to fully lock it. I even jiggle the handle a few times and try to see if it'll open when locked. It doesn't budge, so I start to head back to the room. Then I hear the door rattle a little bit and I turn around and stare at it. I watch the lock itself turn and then the door opens, and it doesn't slam open from the wind, it just slowly swung open. I stayed extremely still because, that was crazy. The door was huge, mind you, clear window on it with no curtains and a big window beside it that also doesn't have curtains. And there was absolutely no one on the other side of it, that much I can guarantee. There was just no way somebody could have ducked out of view either and hurried away from the door after pushing it open, because they would have had to have made a lot of noise hurrying down the steps to get to the walkway. Like I said, it was an old-fashioned door as well, with a simple lock and a simple doorknob as well. No electronic buttons or anything like that to unlock or lock by buttons or remotely or anything. Well, after getting the nerve to close the door again and locking it firmly, really, nothing else happened that night. I couldn't really go back to sleep because I was way too scared to do so. So the following morning I told the others about it, and they were pretty spooked by it too, but otherwise glad that we were only staying that one night. Before we packed up the truck to leave, there was this strange knocking noise coming from the surrounding woods. Not like somebody knocking on a wall or a door or anything. It was a deep, hollow-sounding knock that only knocked twice, stopped for a while, and then would do it again. Maybe it was just the trees knocking together, but after what happened early in the morning like that, it was definitely a little bit unsettling. So yeah, I'm from Florida, and though I've experienced other paranormal activity before, that was the most physical thing that I've experienced, and I've definitely heard plenty of stories about odd occurrences in the Appalachians. I guess in a sort of weird way that I'm glad that I experienced something, but I'll never forget the fear that I felt that night. After all, my first thought was an intruder or something, and it would have been pretty bad being up there so high by ourselves with someone like that. If we had had any reason to run, we could have easily fallen off of a cliff or something in the pitch-black darkness outside. So I'm thankful that, really, we never had to do that.